Everything you need is to succeed at least once. A terrifying werewolf in fury prepares to strike with its sharp claws, which end up hitting the cheek of a young warrior who narrowly dodges and prepares a counterattack with his sword. However, the werewolf leaps into the air, surprising the warrior with its agility. With no time to react, the monster's foot approaches the swordsman at high speed, delivering a powerful kick to the man's jaw, sending him flying. The blow is so strong that just the impact against the wall caused immense destruction in the area. Finally, the warrior finds himself practically defeated in a pitiful state amid stones and dust. However, he used his last strength to mock the monster, which despite knocking him down had been pierced by him. A few seconds later, the warrior recovers and grabs his sword, which is embedded in the werewolf's body, to finish it off once and for all, ending the monster's life with a cinematic, precise, and fatal vertical strike. Then he thinks there's nothing in this infernal world, and a system message informs him that the level 4 hellhound is exterminated. He is alone with these monsters that keep appearing, and the system continues saying that he has gained a certain amount of experience. While grumbling, one of the messages catches his attention, informing him of a level up. However, suddenly a system error appears with the notification starting to collapse along with the warrior's mental state, causing immense frustration in the swordsman, who was informed that level 4 Ryu Hanbin returned to level 1. He needs to be at level 5 to move to the next area, making him cry out for help as he is desperate to be stuck in this place for so long. However, the endless red immensity of that place seemed to have no end. During his terrible stay in this plane, the young warrior had faced dragons in his first year. Then 2 years passed with him still trapped in that place trying to adapt. Thus time continued for 3 and 5 years, with the hero now facing the monsters that once tormented him. In a battle with one of them, the system warns that after piercing the dragon, the fall would likely lead to his end, but that didn't happen. After being trapped in this hell for so long, the only thing left for the warrior to maintain his sanity and hope was counting his days on the cave walls. But 10 years had already passed since he fell into this world, so he gave up counting the days and in a fit of rage, destroyed the place with a punch. The man had been isolated for so long, having fought only against monsters for a decade. Thus, even with the system sabotaging him, he naturally became stronger. On a typical day of his routine, the hero starts thinking about what his current level might be. Meanwhile, he finds himself above a colossal dragon, ready to start his hunt. Somewhere in the kingdom's alleys, whispers are heard followed by unpleasant moans. A blonde man is being attacked, and already on the ground with his last breath, he comments that these demons are scum, and that the goddess will have no mercy on them. But the aggressor finishes him off before he can give any elaborate testament. A hooded figure tells his partner to take it easy because they'll be in serious trouble if they're caught by a Rathenian, but the woman doesn't seem to care about the warning. However, the man says they can return there to kill more once they've completed the contract, which convinces the girl to leave the place. Finally, the woman comments that their job is easy because they just need to find the person who came to this world the same way they did. And as she leaves the alley, the girl sets everything on fire to cover the evidence. This is a world called Thelha Rathna, where someone is selected as the chosen one. The objective in this world is to survive and become as strong as possible. After this brief explanation, a small wolf bites the protagonist's arm and throws him to the ground, making him scream in pain. The man rolls for several meters among the stones and landslides of the place, and when he manages to stop, he is extremely confused, not knowing what is happening there or where he is. Then he looked back, wondering what that dog was. However, he didn't even have time to think about his current situation, already having to defend himself by smashing the animal's skull with the stone that was beside him and throwing it away. As he went to check the monster's body after his attack, one thing was on his mind: if he didn't finish off the animal, it would kill him. Even with its jaw completely shattered by the received stone hit, the monster's instinct makes it continue its assault to the end, placing the protagonist against the edge of a cliff. While he doesn't understand why the animal is attacking him, a yellow message appears in front of him saying it contains instructions. This confuses him as he realizes there is a system of levels and strength, and that players can level up and gain experience by defeating monsters. For a moment, this trace of happiness at realizing he is in a fantasy world causes the hero to lose concentration on the monster that is about to strike him. In such a case, he couldn't stop thinking about where things started to go wrong. As he got up from his bed, he thought about how he woke up every day at noon and wondered if he had been too lazy. 3 months had passed since he was released from mandatory military service, so he felt he had enough reason to relax a bit. Thinking that after leaving the army he could become an active part of society, the last 3 months ended up being an eternal void. Nothing in him changed even in the 2 years he spent serving, with his reality being just eating chips and using his computer recreationally. However, this was a reality that would change very soon. While eating his chips as usual, suddenly a brown smoke began to envelop him, leaving him desperate. But there was nothing he could do, so the smoke began to consume him. And within seconds of this event, he had completely disappeared from the room, leaving only his chair and peripherals as abandoned legacies. In a black and white plane, someone states that all the chosen ones have been gathered, and our hero wonders if he has gone to a better place. The voice continues to complain about the small number of people present, as in a herd there were 7 billion candidates. Someone converses with this voice, informing that precisely because there were 7 billion candidates, they managed to find so many chosen ones. The protagonist cannot understand what is being said and wonders if this is the voice of God, while the voice continues to instruct all the players. The first voice asks if they can really do this, questioning if it won't be too artificial, but the other responds that it will serve as motivation and help. So after deciding on the discussion, the transmission of instructions begins, and a beam of light pierces the protagonist's chest, making him groan in pain. The voice noticed there was an error in the instructions, but didn't care since it only happened to one person. Thus, the chosen one, number 388, begins his dimensional transport. While smashing the wolf's skull with a stone, our protagonist thinks he was selected as a chosen one, and that where he is the world of Thelharafna. However, his reality is of tremendous insalubrity. Even now, our warrior cannot believe that everything he is going through is real, and while he is frustrated, he is also irritated. His life is now in this hell without the comforts of before, and without his parents, he doesn't know what will happen to him. In a fit of rage, the protagonist throws a stone away and punches the ground. After his moment of despair, he comments about being released just 3 months ago. So he didn't even get a girlfriend, lamenting about why this is happening to him. Suddenly, a system message informs him of danger and says that at the moment there is only a 5% chance of surviving in Thelharafna with the player's current abilities. The situation confuses our hero, who begins to realize that this thing is really testing his consciousness by asking if he wants to end his life. The situation was revolting because those people kidnapped a normal person and abandoned him in a different world, saying it's necessary to kill monsters to gain experience. So an option in the system to end his own life is being induced to be chosen. Wisely, the protagonist declines, thinking that if he dies, he will not be sent home, and deciding to stay calm. They wouldn't have kidnapped him if they planned to send him back home after he died. Whether he likes it or not, it will be his end if he doesn't take care around here. For now, the protagonist needs to think of a way to survive and find a way out of there. In light of this, the system informs that the chosen one had his strength increased by finding his fighting spirit. As a yellow light shines in his eyes, several windows appear and ask for a class to be chosen. Quickly, a protagonist's expression improves as he realizes he will no longer have to fight with bare hands and can choose a class. The warrior class is presented as a melee class that can use various martial techniques, but the hero thinks this is only fun in games. Then, upon viewing the mage class and understanding that long-distance combat is the best thing to do, he decides to choose this class. However, upon confirming his choice, the system informs him that the selection was rejected because he doesn't have the necessary capacity for the class. So the hero tries the magic swordsman class, but his selection is rejected again, followed by the rejection of the healer and priest classes, which makes the protagonist lament in frustration. Finally, he found himself forced to choose the last remaining class, the one he had initially denied, the warrior class. In the next selection stage, the system asks him to choose an initial weapon. Understanding that long reach is essential, the hero chooses the long spear, not wanting any other weapon. After this, a strong light emanates from that virtual window, ready to reveal the player's initial weapon, which unexpectedly turns out to be a long sword. The hero tries to argue with the system that he had chosen the long spear and not the sword, but that previous error occurs again. Nervous as never before, he starts to complain and insult the system. But in a split second, the window closes, and the hero remembers that voice saying it made a mistake in the instructions. Knowing that the instructions were the only useful things there, an error could be something that might condemn his life. On the verge of madness, the hero falls to the ground and starts to laugh, but thinks that he doesn't want to act as those people expect him to. So wielding his sword, he thinks that at least this is better than a stone. However, the hero doesn't want his end to be there and is determined to do whatever it takes. Thus, in this place, his hellish and endless journey of strengthening will begin. On the other hand, while the protagonist trains with his sword, he apparently doesn't seem to have many skills with it, inevitably falling to the ground and starting to lament his situation. 7 days have passed since the hero came to Thelharafna, and he has asked the tutorial countless times how he could go home. But it remains silent every time, making him wonder if it was just another bug. Anyway, at this moment, the hero is fighting to survive. An animal hits his shoulder, causing pain, and the protagonist chases after the monster, very irritated. The dogs he always faces are hellhounds, and if there's one thing he has learned, it's that these dogs level up too. Additionally, after he strikes with his sword, he takes the opportunity to advance and attack again. This makes the protagonist wonder if the monster is learning to face him just as he is, so he has only one choice, which is to charge with all his strength, attacking primitively. However, the blow is not effective at all, as the animal easily dodges. Not far from his attack, the monster starts to laugh, making our hero think he has no talent with swords. Now it's the animal's turn to attack with a bloodthirsty instinct. It charges with everything it has. However, the hero is now more prepared than before and is about to use his secret resource, his thrusting skill, which incredibly finishes the animal with just one strike. The system informs him that the level 2 hellhound has been exterminated and awards 22 experience points to the protagonist. Ryu Hanbin finally obtained a skill upon reaching level 2, but because he hasn't learned how to handle a sword, he can barely use his thrust effectively. Furthermore, this is just one of the tutorial functions. If you search through the system, hellhounds can also be considered perfect food as they contain fats, amino acids, carbohydrates, fibers, and minerals. But even with all their violent nature, their fangs and claws become unusable right after death, so this place seems to have been artificially created. Ryu was sure there is a reason they brought him here, since there would be no reason to keep him trapped for nothing. Remembering the voice's comment about there being only 7 billion candidates, the hero wonders where the other chosen ones were sent. However, something in the system window catches his attention, making him stop eating. It informs that the protagonist will be able to leave the Rocky Mountains, which is his current area, and meet other chosen ones once he reaches level 5. Ryu is surprised by the information received, and the system continues. The initial zone is made up of Rocky Mountains and is a safe area where death rates are lower and experience gain is optimized. Monsters corresponding to the level only appear in safe zones, and once the hero reaches level 20, he will be able to complete the map of Thela Rathna and travel to the continent. All this information fries the hero's brain, who begins to put the pieces together. This is a beginner area where players level up to level 5, and if he reaches level 5, he can proceed and then form groups with others upon reaching level 20. Basically, upon reaching level 20 and being transported to the continent, the real battle will begin, and all of this makes Ryu crazy with anxiety. He understands that this is how the Hellhounds are getting stronger, and although it is not important, the hero still wants to return home someday. Ryu believes he cannot trust the tutorial, so to meet other chosen ones and get more information, he must reach level 5 and get out of there. After that, the hero started wandering in search of hellhounds and consequently began hunting them. With the hellhounds growing stronger at the same pace as he was, defeating them did not become any easier. While eating a piece of roasted meat, the system informed the hero that he gained 22 more experience points, consequently leveling up. And by leveling up, he learned the side-slash skill, continuing to face those dogs. Facing a level 3 hellhound with strength similar to that of a beginner warrior, he fought and was injured. Besides having eliminated many of them, eaten, slept, fought, gotten injured, and killed, with this sequence repeating countless times in an endless cycle of gaining experience and killing monsters. After being headbutted in the stomach by one of the hellhounds, our protagonist flew far, being thrown against the ground. He manages to compose himself, and while sliding on the ground, uses one of his hands to grab some sand. Then the monster again tries to attack Ryu with a bite that, if it hit, would end everything. But in a cunning act, the hero throws that sand into the monster's eyes, blinding it for a short period. Then he grabs his sword and delivers a side slash right in the middle of the hellhound's face, ultimately finishing it off. As a result, the system informs him of more experience gained and that Ryu has now reached the necessary amount of experience. After the 27th day, our hero finally reached his goal, leaving him in a state of immense happiness and relief. Having leveled up until now, Ryu had learned 3 skills: the thrust, the side slash, and the vertical slash. Not only that, but his body also began to show the effects of the attributes he gained, now being at the peak physical condition of a man. Even his sword, which was difficult to wield before, had become easy to handle, but as he praised his achievements, an error appeared again in the system window. That's what he thought, but suddenly something strange was happening. The system informed that Ryu Hanbin, who was previously a level 4 warrior, had now returned to level 1. While trying to deny the reality, our hero thinks the tutorial is going crazy, and that it must be just a message error. However, upon checking his status window again, he realized that the level change had indeed happened, bringing him back to level 1 once more. This left the protagonist in a state of immense fury, screaming in disbelief at the injustice happening to him. However, Ryu tries to calm down because he realizes that at least his attributes were retained as well as his skills. At first, the hero tried to look at things optimistically, thinking he had the chance to get ahead of his peers by farming all the XP of the 5 levels again. He somewhat convinced himself that this would be a beneficial experience for building his character. But what awaited him was nothing like what the hero had in mind. When facing the level 1 hellhound again, Ryu realizes that the monster is at a completely different level. He was wrong because the hellhounds continued to grow stronger despite their levels also returning to the beginning, making Ryu continue to risk his life day after day in each battle. After countless attempts to reach level 5, our hero always maintained the hope that this time it would work. He was sure that if he tried one more time, he would succeed. But this repeated infinitely until Ryu finally began to despair. During another fight, now against a massive 3-headed hellhound, the protagonist cuts it down with ease. Our hero continued killing monsters that kept getting stronger and kept checking his experience. This time, he was only 77 experience points away from evolving to level 5 and leaving that place. The hero, while carrying the monster's body, comments that 7 used to be his lucky number, so this time, everything will go well. And as he throws it into a ravine full of monster bones, Ryu thinks that in the last 7 years, he has survived in this hellish situation, going from level 1 to 4 in an eternal cycle. The Chosen Ones do not age, and thanks to the recovery ability, all wounds heal in just 1 day. Returning to level 1 does not reduce their attributes, but they cannot learn new skills because they cannot surpass level 4. Their only skills are thrust, side slash, and vertical slash. As the hero is about to face a massive bone hellhound, he mocks the monster that came to him, making its extermination easier. The system notified that the monsters were placed there to help the Chosen Ones get stronger, but they are only there to be killed. In this case, an undead monster makes no sense. However, after so much time in that place, the same can be said about our protagonist. The tutorial transmission for the Chosen Ones was completed, and the 5th Jaren Rathan operation was initiated. A being thinks they are well accustomed to it since it's their 5th time there, and even in another world, players take at most a year to complete everything. While walking, they just hope to find some useful players this time. But they notice something amid that emptiness. A world seemingly discarded by someone, and probably broken, which makes them think it's very strange. Then, while rummaging through that box, the being inevitably finds a picture frame of the player Ryu Hanbin, who is currently connected to Fel Harathna. In a peaceful house on a comfortable bed, someone is resting. This person is Ryu, who wakes up in his home, wondering if he has really returned to his original world. He believes it makes sense because he was just discharged and thinks he should sleep a bit more. However, a system alarm catches his attention, not letting the hero sleep. It again urges the protagonist to end his life as a way to camouflage the mistake he made. Facing the gravity of the situation he was about to take, Ryu wakes up in that hellish world and quickly removes his hand from the system button. Sitting on the ground in a state of confusion, the hero wonders where he is. He remembers that he has been killing hellhounds like a madman for the past 10 years, thinking it seems he survived another day. But inevitably, he ended up back at level 1 again. This makes him curl up in a fetal position and grunt in frustration. The hero wonders if he can really say he is living and if it wouldn't be better to just give up. However, this depressive thought quickly leaves his mind when the protagonist hears a strange noise. As he gets up from the ground, Ryu wonders if, after agonizing for so long, he will be sent home if he decides to end his life. Still, if he is going to die, it would be better to make his life worth something, and even then, there was a part of the hero that didn't want to give up. In this case, Ryu, wielding his sword, returns to the combat zone, deciding to at least defeat one more of those bastards. After being trapped in this hell for 10 years, the hero gave up counting the days. He no longer knew how much time had passed, whether it was 5 or 7 years. So he developed a hobby and even found something to do. Surviving alone is not an easy task, and this harsh environment did not allow him to be lazy. Because of this, after his weapon was destroyed by the wear of time, our hero in his hobby creates a new one, bigger and better. And as he places it to rest on his back, Ryu thinks that this is now his reality. In the case of not being able to change his situation, he can dedicate himself to doing whatever he can. If there was nothing but rocks, then he just needed to create things, and that's how he built a house, living each day more devoted to this lifestyle. Until now, Ryu no longer lived with anger, but in an instant, his dream was destroyed by a giant hellhound that crushed the hero's house. At that moment, the hero couldn't believe what had just happened. And with no time to rest, a hand from the monster sweeps across the ground, coming towards the hero to hit him. Suddenly, the blow strikes Ryu, who is thrown far away, destroying everything in his path. However, the monster was also hit, having his arm cut off by the protagonist. The hellhound can't believe the state of its hand. But the hero cuts short its lamentation, saying it took him 3 years to build that house. With this, an intimidating aura begins to emanate from the protagonist as he remembers his house, which was turned to dust by the monster. Since it was small, this time Ryu decides to build a palace with the bones of that hellhound. Giant hellhounds like this started to appear, but they were noisy and didn't even taste good. Understanding the danger is in, the monster takes flight to try to escape, and Ryu mocks the monster, saying that even though it is so big, it is still a coward. Despite everything, after constant hunting, the hero learned the best strategy to defeat them since they always start with a powerful attack. In a display of power, the hellhound launches its fire attack, the Draconic Breath. Ryu is slightly impressed by the monster starting with such a potent attack. Inevitably, the attack hits everything within its radius, releasing fire, dust, and lightning. After that powerful attack, the monster waits for the dust to settle, standing to check the state of its enemy. However, what it sees is something that defies natural laws and all possible logic. It is clear that it is impossible to dodge the Hellhound's breath attack because the area of effect is too large, so the hero covers his body and blocks the damage with his strength. But even though he defended himself, the monster burned the tips of his hair, saving him a trip to the beauty salon. Surprised to see the enemy in perfect condition, the Hellhound then casts thunder, light, and fire spells, but these were very painful to be hit by. In this case, the hero blocks them by creating a large earth wall lifted by swinging his sword against the ground, and after that, he quickly dissipates the created barrier. Thus, he moves to deliver his final blow. However, not everything always goes according to the hero's wishes, as it cannot be said that he has talent for swordsmanship. So Ryu improvises by using his physical potential to his advantage. Moreover, the hero also doesn't have other skills because he can't level up. But with the ones he has already trained them many times. To be more precise, he trained them 10,000 times each. Then Ryu consecutively strikes the monster with a vertical slash, a side slash, and a thrust. Combining the three skills, a new one is created, the cross-cut named Triple Cross Attack. It is not a real skill, but no monster can stand after being hit by it, so Ryu is happy to survive another day. Back to the vision of that incomprehensible being who, upon seeing the picture frame of Ryu, realizes that this player is currently connected in Thelha-Rafna. Believing it to be a bug, the being doesn't understand why the boy is still there and is surprised. Because the 5th generation is operating in Jaren Rafna right now, and the 4th in Roha Rafna, and before that, the 3rd generation in Thelha-Rafna. Desperate, the being understands that that player has been there for more than 22 years. Sitting on the ground, the entity thinks it won't be able to invent an excuse if that person finds out and also can't end the hero's life. However, when checking the player's status, he realizes that our hero is only at level 4, questioning how he survived for 22 years. Besides, the player's skills and attributes were terrible, but that wasn't entirely bad because a malicious idea came to the entity's mind. In Thelha-Rafna, as usual, Ryu eats his hellhound meat while saying that he always felt that reaching level 4 was a breeze. Deciding to take a look at his attributes, he activates the extra attributes visualization that reveals the protagonist's immeasurable hidden potential. Incredibly, he also couldn't understand the true potential of his strength, and thinking he is at level 4, Ryu comments that he wants to eat tasty things and meet people. The hero can't see an end to his suffering in that place, but believes that as long as he stays alive, everything will work out. Thinking positively, he believes that one day the day will come when he can leave there. Suddenly, something cracks in the sky, catching the protagonist's attention, who quickly looks at the phenomenon. The being says that if he does this, some problems might arise, and the system informs that the hero has completed the Thelha-Rafna level. Our hero doesn't understand what's happening, but the entity states that all it needs to do is erase the player and his records, believing that he will lose his life on the continent because he is still at level 4. A beam of light falls to the ground, breaking everything and lifting the rocks in an explosive phenomenon. Ryu begins to levitate and becomes very confused while the being wishes for the hero to disappear completely on the Rafna continent. As the hero is levitated, he doesn't understand why everything is happening so suddenly. He is informed that the teleportation of the chosen ones to the designated level has begun. On the continent, a storm approaches a rocky mountain. Suddenly, a lightning bolt falls from the middle of a cloud to the center of a forest. The sound of the lightning hitting the forest floor wakes a draconic descendant who grumbles about these beings not stopping coming there. The demons from other worlds are ones the monster seems to know well, judging by the equipment it apparently keeps as trophies. After all this time, everything he saw had become normal. A red sky where the sun neither rises nor sets, with piles of dead tree branches on the ground. But now, without any warning, everything changed. The hero jumps high above the trees to get a view of his surroundings. He is stunned by the landscape, unable to believe what his eyes are seeing. Being trapped in a rocky hell for so long made him forget the world's beauty, and at this moment the hero is in the saved forest in the kingdom of Greylut. Ryu throws himself into a river, belly first, laughing and enjoying his experience to the fullest. He doesn't know what is happening, and this is not his home, but it is still better than that damned mountain. However, everything is still strange because as soon as he arrived there, his level went up to 5, granting him a communication skill. Thinking for a moment, Ryu realized that he should be at least level 20 to come to the Rafna continent. So he doesn't know the real reason he was brought there, questioning whether his system is still malfunctioning and what he should do. But while peeking through the attribute window, he notices something he had never seen before. A final mission notification asking him to kill one of the 6 goddesses of Rafna. If he kills this goddess, his rewards will be eternal youth and immortality, besides being sent back to Earth with his attributes intact and his wishes granted. However, the hero must keep his identity as a being from another world a secret and register at the Hunters Guild in the corporate city of Onpros. Suddenly, that draconic monster appears and roars with great power to intimidate its opponent. Ryu realizes it is a monster and starts to worry because it seems to be a dragon. The monster calls our hero a despicable demon from another world and questions how he dares to enter its forest. Furthermore, it asks if he plans to face it without a weapon in his hands. Ryu belatedly notices he is far from his sword and sees it a few meters behind him. However, the draconic monster is preparing an attack, giving the hero no time to act, so he realizes he will have to fight empty-handed. The monster launches a burst of blue fire, saying it will burn him to ashes, but the protagonist easily dodges. While preparing a punch, he thinks this is the perfect moment to shake his enemies and kill them right after. Initially, the monster does not take the approaching blow seriously, calling it a ridiculous attempt. However, after being hit, it flies far away from the force of the blow, now opening a gap for the hero to retrieve his sword, which inevitably proved unnecessary when Ryu saw the damage his punch had caused the creature. In an epilogue, we are shown the monster's story, who was a brilliant dragon living in the skies of the Extrad Kingdom. The name of this dragon was Ephir, and it was always the pride of the knights. However, Ephir faced serious problems in the form of the kingdom's prince, who complained about wanting to ride it. However, riding a dragon is not easy, and in the end, the prince suffered a sudden death in one of his training sessions. The poor knight of Ephir was executed, and she managed to escape the kingdom with the help of other kind knights. The lone dragon, now living in the forest, had no time to feel her grief because the forest was full of humans from other worlds who appeared all the time. However, despite having received the training, she never killed her opponents. In this case, could it be said that the kind Ephir was really the source of terrible disasters? Then countless hunters gathered to hunt our poor dragon, and after being severely beaten, Ephir thought to herself that letting humans from other worlds live was a bad idea. After that, they continued to appear, so she had no choice, and besides, she is not a dragon, but a wyvern. Dragons have 4 legs and their wings are on their shoulders, whereas wyverns have wings on their forelimbs, thus she's one of them. Besides, this is common knowledge, and begging, the monster asks to be released from the protagonist's custody. In an interrogation system, Ryu asks how she knows he's from another world, and Ephir says she wasn't sure just by looking, but that Rathmayans rarely appear there. In this case, the hero realized that this wyvern just assumed he was a person from another world. So this means no one will be able to discover his identity just by his appearance, and after this realization, Ryu asks Ephir if this is the saved forest in Greylut. Almost crying, Ephir says that this kingdom was destroyed years ago and is now called Extrad, which makes the hero angry again because the tutorial is outdated. She pleads for her life, saying she didn't know he was so strong, but Ryu argues that she should have stayed quiet instead of attacking. However, the wyvern says she did it because he is a demon from another world, which makes Ryu angry at being called that. Trying to explain, Ephir says it wasn't her who said it, but the goddess, which piques the protagonist's curiosity. The wyvern asks to be treated before anything else, but the hero is very irritated. Additionally, it is revealed that humans from other worlds started appearing in Rathna 40 years ago. Initially, humans from other worlds and Rathnians got along well, but this did not last long. Humans from other worlds began killing to level up, and the most powerful among them allied. Moreover, they created the Great Land, a group with the objective of killing the goddess. Humans from other worlds are strong because, like dragons, they can easily level up by killing their opponents. There was no way to face them since they were led by a level 100 hunter. So before the heroes came, Buralt the Sword King, Zenobia the Archmage, Garin the Terrible, and Holian the Transcendent of Life and Death arrived. They massacred the humans from other worlds in an instant, and after that, the 6 goddesses blessed the continent. Earthlings are demons from other worlds who made contracts with the evil demon god, and that is why they are quickly executed. While stepping on the animal's body, Ryu retorts, saying he was suddenly kidnapped and left to rot on a rocky mountain for decades. But when he finally leaves the place, he discovers that if anyone finds out he is from another world, the entire continent will become his enemy. Additionally, all these things happened before the wyvern was born, but the very irritated hero questions if the goddesses are scary enough to do this. Ryu states he doesn't care about making a contract with a goddess to become her minion, but he will definitely kill the damned demon god. And thus, with an intimidating aura, he asserts that he will return home alive. Looking at Ephir, the hero says he cannot let anyone know his true identity, making the wyvern tremble in fear while promising not to tell anyone. However, a terrible scream echoes throughout the mountain, revealing the monster's cruel fate. 5 days later, upon leaving the Sayed Forest, huge castle walls can be seen on the horizon. This is a city in the northern part of the kingdom of Extrad, the city of Onpraus, which is not only large in size, but also in the number of inhabitants. Around it lies the Sayed Forest and a dungeon in the Ifan Plain where countless monsters appear non-stop. Many hunters try to get rich quickly by risking their lives, some of them from the Onpraus Hunters Guild. People who come there are hunters or those who want to become one. However, it can also be a different case, like the fearsome beings from other worlds. Entering the Onpraus Guild, the protagonist attracts everyone's attention as he walks towards the reception. His size and physical build are impressive to the common citizens. They wonder if the man is from another guild and say he seems to be a veteran hunter. When one of the citizens was about to be rude to Ryu, the receptionist intervened, slapping the man and welcoming the hero. As she does not recognize Ryu as a hunter, she asks if it is his first time coming to the Onpraus Guild and how she can help him. While silence reigns in the place, our hero opens his mouth to state the reason for his visit. Surprising everyone's expectations, the reason was that he wanted to become a hunter. Chapter 5. Inside a cave, the draconic descendant asks if she will be helped by our hero. Ryu confirms, saying that even if his appearance is not suspicious, the fact that he doesn't have clothes or equipment from this world will reveal who he really is. The wyvern keeps grumbling, and the protagonist comments that she hasn't been killing people so far because she is a desirable beast. so he believes she won't tell his secret. With a smile on his face, our hero says that it has been a long time since he had a decent conversation with someone. Eventually, this stirs Efra's feelings, awakening her memories of when she was a companion to humans. In light of this, she decides to change her mind. She informs him that she will help the hero, who thanks her promptly, but she asks him not to tell anyone about her. Suddenly, the protagonist starts changing clothes in front of the animal, who becomes embarrassed by such a lack of delicacy. She questions what the hero is doing, and he says he's changing clothes. However, Efra is indignant that Ryu is stripping, but he argues that she is too. After putting on his clothes, the hero notes that they are too small, and that he might have to tear the sleeves. Changing the subject, the wyvern decides to teach a bit of common sense of that world, asking the hero not to change clothes just anywhere. But he already knew that, asking her to inform him how to find the goddess. Efra informs him that goddesses rarely meet with people, even Rathnians. She explains that one must be one of the 4 heroes or have performed a great service to meet them and receive their blessings. She adds that the only way to get the blessing is by becoming one of those who hunt monsters in dungeons created by the demon god Ormflas. Ryu understood and mentioned that the tutorial also stated he needed to become a hunter to contact the goddesses, which confused Efra greatly. When he tried to show the tutorial window, the wyvern couldn't see it, demonstrating to the hero that he is the only one who can see it. He explained to her that it functions as a support system. However, unlike other humans from other worlds, his is broken, so he doesn't exactly know how things work. Back at the guild, Rhea recalls the advice that unlike other professions, hunters lead a much freer lifestyle. Thus, it's not strange to claim they possess higher levels. In this case, he needs to be extra cautious, as many others must have gone through the same method. Finally, while fixing the hero's hair, Efra summarized all her advice by telling him not to act like a foreigner, which made Ryu extremely anxious. The receptionist hands a form to Mr. Eric Garoon and asks if he said he was from Campbell in the north, to which he stammers a confirmation. This arouses a suspicious look from the woman, making her believe it to be something dubious. Of the smile, she maintains appearances and welcomes him. Ryu, in turn, feels relieved, thinking he would be in serious trouble if he followed the tutorial's instructions. The woman asks if the man wants to transfer from another guild to this one, but Ryu denies it, prompting her to ask how she could help him. The hero says he wants to become a hunter, and this simple phrase is enough to incite fear and alertness in everyone around him. Sweating nervously, the receptionist asks if the man is saying he is not yet a hunter, and everyone shares this sentiment. They whisper among themselves that the newcomer might be from another world, but one of them advises they stay quiet. Faced with the change in atmosphere, Ryu doesn't understand their reaction, wondering if he had done something wrong. The woman asks the hero to place his hand on the measurement stone, and he wonders if he will have to fight, but realizes their hesitation indicates uncertainty. Thus, depending on his abilities, they can create an appropriate verification following the guild's regulations. All Ryu needs to do is touch the measurement stone. He doubts if it checks if someone is from another world or not, and if he is caught there, he won't be able to meet the goddess. However, if he decides to flee, it will be the same as revealing his secret. Destroying everything there would be easier, but he is confident that everything will go well. In a reality check, the receptionist is impressed with the hero's attributes, saying that all of them are a heroic level, which impresses the citizens, while Ryu maintains a dashing pose like a soap opera heartthrob. In this case, mounted on the wyvern and wearing armor, he must now kill Ormflas, the terrible demon god, making everyone happy. Witnessing the hero's story, Efra only observed all that nonsense quietly and patiently. She states that she can't believe what she just heard, but Ryu adds that dreaming is free. Contrary to the initial expectation, when he places his hand on the measurement stone, the hero is revealed as a level 5 warrior. Initially, everyone is astonished, not believing what they see. However, they quickly burst into laughter, and at this moment, they talk among themselves about how foolish they were to think he was from another world. Ryu doesn't understand the reason for the laughter, but even the receptionist can't hold back at this moment. After the laughter, she explains that most people coming from the forests to register there are from other worlds, so if the hero's level were higher, it would be a problem. One of the men joins the conversation, saying that these damn ones start at level 20 and always say the same thing, wanting to become hunters even though they are already at level 20. Relieved, the woman informs Ryu that the registration cost is 300x. Ryu had never thought he would be happy for his level being so low. However, as he takes the money out of his pocket to pay the fee, he realizes that he spent 300x out of the 400x borrowed from Efra, which is equivalent to 11,000. Then the protagonist's identification is ready, and the receptionist informs him that a second copy will cost 80x. Additionally, she tells him to return when his level is high enough. Ryu thinks that now things are starting for real and that he needs to make his name famous in the hunter circle. The woman then asks if he has a mission in mind. The hero says he wants to explore the dungeon, and at that moment, someone interrupts the conversation, questioning his choice. A man with white hair tells him it's better to calm down instead of becoming monster food. After all, someone at level 5 should know their place. The guild woman welcomes Mr. Laud and asks if he and his group are planning to go to the Save Forest. Laud then says he's heard news. He mentions that the number of monsters in the dungeons is increasing a lot, with them now even attacking nearby houses. Laud is at level 21 and boasts that he doesn't feel right sending useless hunters to do his job. In this case, he'll have to go personally. Ryu doesn't understand why the man is so full of himself since he's at the same level as Effer. However, in a general context, he is above everyone else. Even so, the hero doesn't want to get involved with him, and the woman, trying to avoid Laud's gaze, reminds that there is still a vacancy in his group. In this case, she addresses Mr. Eric, saying that completing missions alone is impossible, and going to dungeons is even worse. This makes the hero dread what's coming. Finishing, she asks if it wouldn't be better to work with Laud's group while getting used to things around there, bringing Ryu's worst nightmare to reality. After deciding what to do, the group leader turns to one of his members, informing him that since they have a rookie now, there is no more space for him. However, the mage confronts him, saying he is level 25, and Ryu realizes that the tutorial shows a higher level than stated. In this case, he must be hiding something. In his mind, the hero thinks he stared at the mage too much, but it doesn't matter since Laud stated there was no space for him. However, making a drama, the group leader contests the situation. He says that since the request comes from Miss Seguri, the pride of the Onpris Hunters Guild, he will take care of the level 5 insect. Ryu feels irritated by being called that, but thinks he can't fight him since it would lead to a fatality. Wanting to play with the hero, Laud asks if Ryu dreams of becoming the Sword King due to the size of his sword, but when he tries to lift it, he notices something. The sword didn't even budge, making him wonder how a mere level 5 can carry such a thing. At that moment, the hero's attention turns to Laud, causing the group leader to tremble all over. Raising his sword along with the hunter, Ryu orders him to release his belonging. This excites the guild members as they don't like Laud very much, and they hope for a fight to start. Suddenly, a man with blue eyes and a mohawk approaches with his group, saying he finally found what he was looking for. The hero demonstrates his strength by lifting Laud off the ground with his sword so easily, showing he's not as weak as they thought, surprising everyone as this came from a level 5 hunter who was just registered. In such a case, a mohawk man's eyes shine with what he just saw. He tells the hero that with a body like that, he'll be able to defeat even people at level 10. However, the group leader asks Berkman not to interfere since he's training the rookie. Berkman asks if the hero's name is Eric and informs him that fighting there's not a problem, but if he damages the guild, he'll have to face everyone. After accidentally breaking a guild structure, the protagonist apologizes, saying he doesn't want to fight anyone there and doesn't want to be expelled. After being bumped by the hero, which made Laud fall to the ground, he angrily says that no one else would accept a level 5 in the group besides him. Disheartened, Ryu realizes that the man is right as he used almost all of his money just to register and can't do anything due to his low level. However, Berkman breaks the hero's feeling, saying that leveling up with the body he has will be a breeze. Furthermore, Berkman was looking for someone with a muscular body like Eric, and then offers our hero an opportunity to join his group. With a gleam in his eye, the man says he knows muscles like those don't grow overnight, and that the only reason his level is low is due to lack of experience. Ryu realizes this old man's level is quite high, but because he came from another world, his growth rate is high, so he won't be able to stay in the group for long. Even so, he will still need to make an effort if he wants to get somewhere, thanking everyone for accepting him. The city of Onpraus developed thanks to the dungeon and monsters, with business and commerce revolving around these hunters. The city produced products using materials brought by hunters, and there are 2 main hunting grounds: the dungeon in the Eifin Plains and the entrance area of the Save Forest. There are some small villages near the forest, but since monsters rarely venture outside the forest, subjugation missions are very rare. However, lately the number of monster attacks in the forest outskirts has increased, so many hunters have joined subjugation missions. One typical high-level monster is known as Devolk, and despite being slow, their grip is strong enough to crush rocks. They use their own weight to create powerful attacks, charging at their opponents at high speed. One of them lands a powerful headbutt on Berkman's shield, who strains to withstand the attack. However, the warrior is stronger than the monster, skillfully countering the blow. It's the strongest tank in all of Onpraus. However, dealing with 3 Devolks at once will be a difficult task. Berkman quickly realizes the attack that will come through his weak point, understanding that he momentarily let his guard down. Luckily, he manages to defend himself by countering the monster's attack halfway. However, an accident occurs with Berkman stumbling on the ground and falling to his knees under the pressure from that Devolk. At this critical moment, reinforcements arrive with a woman holding a spear passing over the monsters with extreme speed and flexibility. She pierces the neck of one of them, giving the group's tank a chance to focus on his one-on-one fight and finish off that Devolk. This woman is the DPS of the level 21 group. After the battle, she jokes if Berkman wants to retire for having difficulties, even against these weak monsters. The tank starts laughing after hearing the suggestion, but the woman notices something different about him. Analyzing his shoulder, she discovers a deep wound and despairs, stating they must return quickly to take care of it. But Berkman says it's nothing and in a romantic moment, asks Amber not to worry about him. With a trembling voice, she comments that she has never worried about him until now. Their mouths drew closer in a beautiful scene. However, the tank's wound begins to be healed by someone interrupting this moment between the two. The person invoked the presence of Preller's breath. It's Erwin Ropal, the level 16 spiritualist of the group and Berkman's younger sister. The tank is proud of his condition and Amber is embarrassed. She also boasts in a joking tone that her brother can't do anything without her, but one of the monsters appears behind her. Fortunately, she is saved by someone who cast a powerful spell called Firehammer. This is the mage in support of the level 18 group, Hubert Krutas, who, after saving Erwin, comments on the danger she was in by being careless in this way. Berkman's group is the best when it comes to a balanced and coordinated team. They don't just focus on attacks and are the most reliable in on-press. Checking out their teamwork, Ryu thinks there's no better place to be than this. And that's why his situation is boring, because while the group members fight, he just needs to hide and work as a baggage carrier. He had been left out of battles because his level was still too low, but they still split the profits equally with him, so it's not all bad. Things were going very well, but there was a problem that only the hero could see at that moment. Hundreds of Devolks were approaching in an ambush led by their level 25 lord, who begins to taunt his opponent for being a human. However, suddenly the leader of the monster succumbs to some injuries from projectiles launched into his body. The perpetrator of the attack was Ryu, who did this with mere shots of small stones. The hero is disappointed because even with the highest level among them, it didn't yield any experience points, and the system informs that he needs to hunt monsters of higher levels. He believes he should ask the group to hunt stronger monsters next time, and at that moment, Erwin informs her groupmate that it's time to gather. In the post-battle environment amid wooden houses, that woman forcefully stabs a knife into the monster's belly and then thrusts her arm inside the wound. With a smile on her face, she removes the monster's heart and shows it to her brother, saying they should get at least 15x for this. The mage confirms the magic stone is quite large and says they can surely get great value for it. Furthermore, they can sell the Devolk leather, killing two birds with one stone, and while observing the situation, Ryu thinks under normal circumstances he would have vomited. But he had also dissected many hellhounds, so it was no longer a novelty, prompting the hero to take the lead in producing the materials. After impressing everyone with his skills, Erwin asks how the protagonist manages to do it so quickly, and he explains he's been doing it for the past 20 years. This makes the woman curious about her colleague's age, who claims to be 24. Berkman joins the conversation and asks the hero about his parents. He explains that because he was kidnapped 20 years ago, he didn't remember much about them, and that now it was impossible to go back home. This touches everyone, especially Berkman, who never imagined the burden the hero carried, but now he didn't need to feel bad anymore as they decide to welcome him as family. Everyone gathers to try to console the hero, saying everything will be okay, and Ryu just thinks these people are really nice. The protagonist claims to be grateful for allowing someone as low level as him in the group, but Berkman consoles him, saying he stayed at level 25 for 5 years. This confuses the hero because the tank's current level is 25, so Erwin intervenes, informing that there aren't many high-level monsters around except those in the dungeon. Amber explains that the Devolk Lord is considered a high-level monster there, and that they don't need to hunt stronger monsters than those since they have no intention of going to places like dungeons. At this moment, our protagonist has a reality check and begins to worry about his future. He decides then to take action, standing up and telling everyone he will practice with his sword. While the hero moves away, Berkman asks his colleague not to strain himself too much, and the mage says not to approach the saved forest because it's a dangerous place. Among them, Erwin comments that a kind man like the hero obviously can't be someone from another world, and the mage says he will accompany him, which the tank agrees with. Approaching the fence, Hubert asks Mr. Eric how his training is going. However, even after looking everywhere, he can't find a trace of Ryu. While running at high speed through saved forest, the hero says it's impossible, because even finding various life forms, there isn't a single monster there that gives him experience. Starting to despair, Ryu frantically searches for one, but the ones he finds don't even seem to be monsters, resembling more domestic animals. In his memories, a conversation with Effer came to mind. Ryu asked if it wouldn't be dangerous for her to live in the forest, and she smiled, saying she was the strongest in the area. Then the hero comes to terms with reality, feeling defeated because there really isn't any opponent worthy of him. But he thinks it makes sense since monsters with levels similar to wyverns don't give him experience, and it's good that he returns before it gets late. Suddenly, a loud explosion is heard by our protagonist. This makes him remember the hellhound dragons from his old world. Quickly, he dashes off to find the noise that caught his attention, because even though it's not as grandiose as the hellhounds, it surely couldn't have come from a normal monster. In his mind, Ryu believes that if he can hunt down the being responsible for the explosion, maybe he can also level up. Upon finally arriving at the source of the noise, the hero prepares to draw his sword and calls out the monster for battle. However, the situation in front of him is nothing like what he expected. Upon reaching his destination, Ryu finds a man with long red hair completely naked. The man turns out to be the mage from before, who is surprised by the unwanted visit, but our protagonist also didn't expect this and decides to apologize. Making the connection that the man in front of him is Laud's group mage, the hero still wonders why he's naked. However, he knows that at the moment, that's not what matters since there's no monster there. Despite this, he was certain the sound came from there but decides to apologize and leaves, saying he will pretend not to have seen anything. However, the mage asks Ryu to wait for a moment, commenting that he seems very suspicious, which leaves our protagonist indignant because he was not in a position to say such a thing. Completely naked, the mage continues, asserting that this is not a place where a level 5 can be. While thinking he must find the monster soon, Ryu says he heard a loud noise as he passed by and thought there might be a big monster nearby, and that since his group must be waiting, it's better for him to go. But the mage was outraged and went to his wand to prepare an offensive. He creates a circle of fire around Ryu, interrupting his farewell, and asks the hero to stop right now and tell him the truth. The mage asks if Ryu saw the monster and threatens him with a fire spell if he doesn't tell. Unexpectedly, our protagonist walks towards the man and closes his hand around the tip of his wand, extinguishing the fire from the magic. At this moment, the mage becomes completely defenseless and the hero's expression changes to seriousness. He says he doesn't know why this is happening because he already said he didn't see any monster. Furthermore, Ryu asks what's wrong with the mage and Laud, because they're always underestimating low-level people. That mage in turn claims that's not what he was trying to say, and apologizes, admitting to acting too emotionally. In the depths of the forest, Laud watched the entire conversation and decided to draw his weapons because he was filled with tremendous hatred for Ryu. He then shouts something to be heard, already preparing for combat, and this obviously catches the hero's attention. A misunderstanding is clear as Laud comments, seeing the proximity of the two, that apparently Ryu decided to show his claws now. In a fighting stance, Laud says that humiliating Miss Seguri alone was not enough, so Ryu had the audacity to lay hands on the lady of his group. The hero doesn't understand who the group leader is calling a lady, and the mage states that his colleague must not have understood what's going on, so maybe they should leave. Laud is a powerful magical swordsman, and despite that pose, it indicates that he is preparing to execute a technique, and the pose is the disadvantage of being in this class. But when he assumes that pose, he never hesitates, so the leader of his group says he will say only one more thing. While asking about the name of the enemy who will be defeated with his twin blades, the hero tells the mage it's better to get dressed. Upon realizing he was being ignored, he becomes deeply irritated and decides to attack at once, exuding a powerful electric aura from his swords. With a serious look, Laud says he will show the difference between their levels, thus going after the hero with his storm sword skill. Ryu, on the other hand, doesn't want to escalate this into a big fight, so at the moment the sword approaches his neck. He bends, dodging the attack and apologizing. However, as he crouches down, a part of the sword's hilt hits the man's genital organ, and a strong burst of air along with lightning was caused in the place, generating a noise that echoed throughout the forest. Back at the lodging and sitting in one of the wooden houses, the hero has his sword stuck in the ground and seems to lament something. Berkman intervenes, saying Mr. Attis informed him of what happened and that it wasn't his fault, but Ryu says this is a pain for which he cannot be forgiven. After deciding to wait only for the results, Urwis opens the cabin door, leaving everyone curious about the outcome of the situation. The tank sister warns that Laud is not in life-threatening condition since he was brought in quickly, but the situation was serious. Upon entering the cabin to check the real state of the man, everyone fell silent. Although blame could fall on him, the pain and suffering he was going through could not be solely attributed to one person. This was something no one could comfort him with. That morning, Mr. Attis took Laud back to Onpras City. Next, the group leader finally found out the truth about Attis's gender and had difficulty facing him again. The hero couldn't find the monster responsible for that huge noise, but he quickly forgot about it after spending 3 months with Bucherman's group. In front of Save Forest at the camp, someone is upset about news regarding Laud. The situation seems serious because, according to rumors, he decided to go to the dungeon alone. Amber comments that going to the dungeon alone with that hunter's level is akin to committing suicide, so Ryu questioned it because he thought Laud's level was high. She says it is, but he's used to facing weak monsters, which they hunted to survive, naturally helping him level up. However, there were no high-level monsters, which the hero easily understood, so he decided to ask if the ones in the dungeon were different. Amber explains that they are not originally from this world. The monsters are created by dungeons installed by the demon god Ormflas, so it's common to see some near level 30 or even higher. In Ryu's mind, he believes these level 31s must help him level up, so it's necessary to go to the dungeon even if secretly. However, Berkman informs him that monsters are not the only problem, and Urwis adds that many humans from other worlds secretly hunt there, causing the hero to give up. In case it's such a dangerous place, Ryu is curious why Laud is going there, and Bucherman explains it's probably due to a healing artifact. Upon questioning about the artifact, it's explained that the source of power inside these dungeons are artifacts, items of various shapes with various abilities. According to rumors, one of these artifacts has the power to heal any kind of wound, so Laud probably hopes to find one of those. Numerous monsters have been emerging from Save Forest lately. In this case, Bucherman hopes this isn't a bad omen, but Ryu understands this must be his only option. As night falls in the forest, everyone in the cabin lies down to sleep. However, our hero decides to take a walk alone. He says no matter how many times he comes, it's still scary and there shouldn't be a way for a huge monster not to appear in a place like this. Remembering Effer lives nearby, the hero thinks it's best to go to her and ask. However, as he passes by a tree, something different from usual appears in front of him. Yawning, Ryu tries to remember where the wyvern lives and doesn't notice a monster behind him. The two stare at each other for a brief moment, and upon realizing what's happening, the hero is startled. He backs away, questioning what the being in front of him is, and prepares to draw his sword. This monster is a level 31 Tatiro. The description informs that sword attacks are useless because its body is covered in a shell, and they usually live in the dungeon. Ryu doesn't understand why a dungeon monster is there and ponders what the monster system said about being resistant to physical attacks. In this case, these are terrible opponents to face. Given their advantage over the hero's fighting style, they also have greater numbers. Demonstrating they are capable of talking, one of them asks if he's a mage and another denies it after noticing the sword the man was carrying. At this point, the Tateros start laughing at Ryu's face for being a swordsman, but he lands a vertical strike on one of them that cuts it in half in one go. Rejoicing upon realizing the tutorial is a lie and leaving the monsters in shock. The desperate Tateros discuss among themselves that the hero's weapon actually has magic imbued in it. However, the monster's pride speaks louder and shouts that knives don't hurt them because they've always devoured swordsman humans. After finishing his speech, Ryu quickly appears in front of the monster, asking what it's talking about. One of them wisely decides to flee as he realizes the trouble he's in and that it's dangerous outside the dungeon. However, in an instant, Ryu catches up and asks where the monster is going, which freezes him with fear. In a desperate attempt to save his life, the Tatiro starts digging under a tree. He tries to flee as fast as possible, and Ryu stays by his side because he wants to go wherever the monster is going. After digging a lot, the monster finally reveals the portal from where it came and prepares to escape. Ryu comments that he found the Tatiro, but his attention turns to the portal in front of him. The hero asks the monster what this is, but doesn't want to talk. Then the system informs that it's a magical teleportation in use with destination to the Eifin Plain dungeon. The fact there's a portal connected to the dungeon sparks Ryu's interest and curiosity. He had never heard of something like this appearing in the dungeon and asks if this is something the monsters did, but the Tatiro informs him they don't use magic. The monster's answer doesn't convince Ryu, who questions him again and says he would let him go free if he told him. However, if there won't be any cooperation, our protagonist states that he will just have to destroy everything. However, the monster becomes desperate, saying that there can't be any destruction because no one can enter by that person's order. The hero doesn't know who this person is but still decides to enter the portal and tells the monster to pretend it didn't see anything. The monster's current mission must be to ensure that no one enters the portal so that person won't find out. Despite doing this to safely explore the dungeon, the Tatiro was convinced by that argumentation and started covering the hole with dirt again, claiming to know nothing. Already in the dungeon, the claws of a Tatiro are dangerously close to the face of a hunter who is in real danger. He seems cornered being pinned down, but still worries about his group mate, telling her to hold on. After managing to free himself from that unfavorable position, the hunter prepares a powerful kick, hitting the monster's head, while telling it to stay away from his partner. However, it's noticeable that so far none of his attacks have worked. His axe is completely useless in this case. Magic truly seems to be the only possible solution. At this moment, a Tatiro ends up piercing Alicia's left leg, making her moan in pain and fear. Even wounded, the mage casts a spell, asking for the great light to spread his presence in the place along with its bright sound. Thus, she conjures the flash spell that blinds the monster. However, the axe hunter is also affected by the flash, realizing that everything is blurry at the moment, but at least he can see through one eye. While covering one of his eyes, the hunter asks Runel for help with his healing. But when he turns his face towards his friend, something completely shocks him. Unfortunately, his groupmate has been captured by a Tatiro and is no longer alive. Facing this, the hunter prayed to the heavens for someone to come to his group's rescue because their tragic end was closer than ever. Before being finished off as well, the hunter pleaded for help again, now losing hope. Then the Axeman is surrounded by a pool of blood coming from his back. However, the blood isn't his. It's the monster's because, in answer to his prayers, someone appeared to help, defeating several Tatiros at once. The hunter realizes that the Tatiro's head was severed with just one blow and not just one. It's mentioned that a Tatiro always protects its head with laminated arms, and the space to attack the neck is extremely small. However, this person first made the monster lower its arms and then cut off its head using that opportunity. Facing this technique can only be done by a magical swordsman user of jewel blades like Lod, a man in front of him. Lod asks if the hunter knows him, and he informs that yes, they had heard that he came to the dungeon to hunt days ago. The man praises his savior, saying he's amazing, and Laud awkwardly thanks him, having only been trying to survive for the past 70 days. Raud asked the young adventurer if he knew him, and he confirmed, saying he knew that he had started exploring dungeons alone a few months ago. But the lost swordsman who had been wandering for 70 days told the excited young man that the rumor was not entirely true. After his last encounter with the protagonist, a man got drunk at the guild and found himself in the dungeon after passing out. And since he entered there alone and drunk, he couldn't find the exit, but everything would change because of these two adventurers. The injured mage who stopped the bleeding had heard the rumor that he was looking for the healing artifact he didn't even know about, but he grabbed a potion upon seeing her injury. But the young man tried to stop him from using the rare potion since they had some regular ones, but it was too late. When the girl claimed that the man's actions were related to her gender, he denied it, which made her ask for the specific reason. Then Raud claimed that the potion wouldn't heal her wounds and thought it would increase their chances of escaping the dungeon. The mage swallowed her pride and decided to repay the man later when he said he decided to use it on her instead of keeping it. With that, the man went on his way, stating that this wound would make it impossible to wander through the dungeon, so the girl asked if he really made a detour to help a group of strangers. When the woman was about to start arguing, the magical swordsman was struck by intense pain, which he tried to disguise in front of the two. The pain was due to his cowardice, but he advised the young ones to focus on escaping the place, stating that he wouldn't be able to endure much longer. But the dungeon explorers assumed that the man helped them despite suffering from such a painful wound that not even a rare potion could heal. Suddenly, the place started to shake aggressively. But when the boys speculated an earthquake, the girl claimed that this doesn't happen in dungeon dimensions, which led him to think that this tremor was the work of a monster. So Raud prepared his sword and asked the two young adventurers to run since he would rather die than do number 2 in front of a woman. The girl claimed that the crazy man would die if he faced many monsters, but he didn't care and told her to run since he was about to be relieved from his stomach pain. A loud sound of footsteps could be heard from one of the many tunnels. Then the other adventurer grabbed his confused companion and ran into another tunnel. With tears in his eyes, the boy stated that they would only slow down the magical swordsman and should make the best use of his sacrifice. But the surprised man couldn't understand why the boy was running away with the girl. Raud was not pleased with the situation but assumed that this adventure would have increased his level. But when the man thought he could handle a number of monsters, a giant swarm of Tataras began to emerge from the tunnel. Seeing this, the poor man ran as fast as he could to escape what he considered certain death. But unexpectedly, the monsters themselves were also running for their lives. The magical swordsman looked at the terrified giant insects as they fled into one of the tunnels. Raud was astonished and wondered what could have scared such a swarm like that. Meanwhile, several Tataras' corpses filled the other side of the dungeon. Their killer was none other than Ryu, who began exterminating them effortlessly. The strong man was disappointed with the lack of XP received from the dungeon he had been eagerly awaiting. The protagonist spoke about how hard it is to swing his blade in such a tight space and complained to the monsters about the force he had to hold back with the tank. A golden tatter asked the others to flee, but they refused to show their bravery. Then the golden insect motivated itself and claimed that the swordsman would defeat them. But its words suddenly turned into screams as the mountain of muscles armed with a giant sword charged toward them, demanding XP. And when the man started complaining about the lack of enemies, a glowing floating object caught his attention. Ryu couldn't believe what he was seeing. To his surprise, the man discovered an artifact called the Fireball Bracelet, which was used as a power core. But before the man could even get excited, he began to theorize that this is the kind of item gained after defeating a sub-boss with a high-level monster dead behind him. Then he thought about how all the nearby weak monsters would disappear if he took the artifact and about the final boss with his main magic item, but he felt something was wrong. The system informed the man that the artifact would grant him the ability to cast fireballs by shouting the name of the attack, which could be used 30 times. As soon as he read the bracelet's description, the man put it on without thinking twice. After all, it's every man's dream. Then, after confirming he was alone, the man began to invoke the magic. Concentration and focus filled the eyes of our protagonist as he was in the middle of the invocation. At the end of the spell, Ryu extended both arms in front of him, ready to launch a fireball. The mystery of monsters that appear endlessly in dungeons was revealed by the hunters who explored them, discovering that they are artificially created in a special chamber. And the reason monsters appear incessantly was the central artifact in the middle of the chamber. To this day, the reason why the core takes the form of an item is still a mystery. However, the hunters named these mysterious objects full of magic. These powerful items were known as artifacts, but to the man's surprise, no fireball came out of the artifact, making him wonder if it was broken. It turns out that it is necessary to reach level 31 to be able to use it, unlike other items. But Ryu, smiling in frustration, thinks the bracelet is garbage because someone who managed to get this deep into the dungeon shouldn't have to worry about level requirements. However, there is a reason why the return of an adventurer with an artifact is something quite rare. It's all because of the difficulties adventurers face over the years and the growth of their egos due to the discovery of a magical item. These two factors would make them see the torment ahead, just as the steps in front of Ryu, as another chance for greatness. The protagonist got excited and assumed that the boss must be down there. A large stone door opened. The man who had finally descended the stairs needed to get out before his party's tank woke up. Ryu was now in the central area of the dungeon, wanting the boss to appear soon in that empty room. As the protagonist approached the central item, he began to taunt the absent monsters, hoping for a decent fight. But as the man continued rambling and tried to grab the core, a mysterious entity was watching him from above, and a tentacle grabbed the careless man's arm as he reached for the artifact. The tentacles seized the protagonist before he could notice them. Ryu was finally face to face with what he had been waiting for. Then the protagonist got excited about the XP that the level 45 dungeon boss called Tentacle Beholder would drop. But the mountain of muscles had to focus and get serious as his 4 limbs were trapped. Still, before he could analyze the situation, a screaming person entered the central area of the dungeon. The protagonist came face to face with Raud. Ryu couldn't believe his eyes. And the magical swordsman didn't understand the presence of his nutcracker inside that room. Then the muscular man assumed that his secret had been discovered. But the protagonist, who tried to cover up his story, was interrupted by a sudden laugh. That laugh belonged to none other than Raud. The magical swordsman startled the muscular man with his maniacal laugh as he drew his swords. Raud assumed that the protagonist was actually a monster who disguised himself as his worst fear to scare and confuse him. So the confused Ryu had to listen to the man claiming he would be fooled by the monster's appearance because a level 5 couldn't enter the dungeon. Seeing this, the muscular man decided to play along to save his secret and himself. The tentacle beholder was confused to see one hunter attacking another. But the monster began to grow another tentacle. This creature had the ability to see everything around it and relied on its quick tentacles and massive strength, a combination that allowed it to target the opponent's blind spot in a fraction of a second. But Ryu managed to grab the monster's tentacle at the last moment, saving Raud, whose sword was now just inches from his savior's intimate parts. The protagonist immediately felt alarm as his private parts were in danger. So to save himself, the man jumped into the air, hitting the tentacle in the process. The impact was so strong that the dungeon boss's eyes, who was in deep pain, almost popped out. This caused the creature to fly to the ceiling, while the relieved man descended, grateful for the safety of his private parts. But as soon as he focused on the boss monster he considered weak, Raud continued his attack. Ryu had to dodge the sword at the last moment, but the movement of his hand was about to drag the monster along, which led the tentacle beholder to almost be moved. And so the dungeon boss was thrown against a column. Raud bombarded the man with sword strikes, taking out his anger on him. But Ryu blocked and easily avoided all the blows, assuming that the magical swordsman had gone mad since he must have been treating him as an imposter, and the monster was about to be dragged again by its tentacle. The tentacle beholder suffered as it was hurled all around the chamber. In the end, the protagonist used the monster's tentacle to block the enraged adventurer's sword. Raud blamed the man for his downfall, calling him a demon and accusing him of being in a relationship with Artis. But Ryu firmly denied the last accusation. The irate swordsman wished death upon his nutcracker. Suddenly, Raud's face became monstrous while his skin surprisingly turned purple. The muscular man was confused to see the magical swordsman being lifted by a tentacle, which made the adventurer's task more difficult since he now had to rescue his assailant. The dungeon boss began to communicate through Raud and expressed its anger toward the protagonist for making it bounce all over the place like a toy. But the creature noticed that Ryu hadn't hurt this man and assumed they were close. After that, it grew 4 tentacles with needles. And as it drove them into the man's body, the creature stated that dying at the hands of his ally would be the worst death for someone like the protagonist. But the muscular man drew his long sword with a menacing aura and agreed for the monster to possess Raud's body. All the hunter was interested in was the dungeon boss's XP, which filled the tentacle beholder with fury. Seeing this, the monster decided to adopt a new tactic. Raud was originally going to be killed for the dungeon, but the tentacle beholder chose to turn him into the dungeon's new sub-boss. And after killing all the hunters present in the dungeon, the monster planned to make them to devour them alive. The first meal of the new Raud and his monstrous ham was already decided, and so the sub-boss attacked the protagonist to savor his flesh. Even among dungeon bosses, tentacle beholders always required intelligence to be defeated. Its intelligence is sufficient to overpower humans despite its lack of destructive power, which would lead hunters to be infected with parasites when captured, exactly like what happened with Raud and his monstrous arm. This process would turn humans into monsters. The dungeon boss thinks that Ryu is incapable of taking down the infected magical swordsman since he is just a man despite his strength. The monster's attack was easily dodged by Ryu, who used his sword without the creature noticing. Suddenly, the dungeon boss's vision was cut in half. The muscular man seemed truly irritated. The dungeon boss was cut in half in front of the disappointed man. He couldn't comprehend his defeat. The hunter managed to kill the monster effortlessly using the wind generated by his sword strike. According to the defeated monster, the swordsman is so strong that it would be useless to open the portal and decided to flee before he took the main item. The tentacle beholder decided to inform someone of the situation, but suddenly it was struck from behind while trying to flee. It was none other than Ryu, who killed it thinking it was an insect. With that, the muscular man decided to return to his group. But something seemed to have caught his attention. The man started counting and then shouted 54 billion. It was already morning in the outside world. Someone was training their muscles. It was none other than the tank. But while he was training outside, his sister came over and asked about the backpack carrier. Both the Lancer and the tank said they hadn't seen him, but the absence of his weapon made her concerned. She began to imagine the worst, when Eric accidentally startled her by appearing from behind with a giant dead lizard on his shoulder. The girl expressed how anxious she was about the man's sudden disappearance and asked if something had happened, which he denied. The disappointed man began to recall the dungeon. A few minutes ago, the man was surprised by the number on his screen. By killing the dungeon boss, he acquired a total of 113,340 EXP. We remember that he needed 1100 XP to go from level 4 to level 5 and how the giant hellhounds were worth only 258 EXP. With that, the man assumed that he only needed 2200 XP to reach level 6 and speculated a big jump in his level after killing the dungeon boss. But he was stunned to realize he needed a total of 54,581,862,560. The man then began to calculate the XP required to level up. With that expression, Ryu left the boss's chamber. He kept the same expression as he exited the dungeon. Upon exiting, he encountered the monster from before, holding a purple lizard in its hand. Ryu took the dead beast with him. That constant look made his teammates worried. The Earthling finally understood just how desperate his situation really was. Some time had passed since the protagonist's adventures in the dungeon. Even after a week, he and his teammates couldn't locate any monsters outside the Sot Forest. And due to the absence of prey, they returned to Onfrost earlier than expected. The guard at the city gate stated that they would need to show their license, otherwise they would not be allowed to enter. But when the driver yelled at the guard about this stupid law, the team members discussed how strange this was since they should only need to show their guild emblems to gain access. Buckman explained to the young guard that they had been out of the city for 3 months and needed to be informed about recent events. The guard turned out to be Goraman, a friend of the team's captain, who was asked what happened while they were away. According to Goraman, the Hunters Guild ordered all its members outside the city to return. This was due to the closure of the Ipen Plain dungeon. The protagonist began to look around. He noticed how his companions were gloomy and how the streets were silent when they should have been happy that they no longer had to fear the dungeon. Ryu only managed to use the teleporter because he didn't retrieve the core, which means someone else stole it after he left. Curious, he asked the support who had closed the dungeon, but the answer was that not knowing who did it worried everyone. Closing a dungeon is an incredible feat for hunters, and only an Earthling would hide such an achievement. But that wasn't the only problem, the Lancer stated. The Inquisitors, who were Earthling hunters of the Church, would pursue anyone suspected of being above level 20 since they couldn't differentiate hunters from Earthlings, and would torture people into confessing. The protagonist found this absurd and worried about his friends who were above the required level, and this was the reason why most hunters had left the city. It was then that Ryu realized that his kind would always be rejected. But Buckman ended the discussion because they had business to attend to. Since they had been out in the wilderness for so long, the tank suggested they go collect their rewards and return to the guild to exchange the demon stones. All the team members were delighted with the idea of selling the goods in the rookie's backpack to celebrate his first mission. Suddenly, the muscular man realized something. But when the tank proposed that Madame Ember go to Balton's shop with Eric, he stated that he would go alone. The Lancer was concerned since the Mountain of Muscles ignored market prices. But Buckman didn't care, because the young man would soon realize the importance of the items he carried. But a loud, surprised scream was heard from Balton's shop. It turned out that the shop owner was unwilling to buy the protagonist's goods due to the current situation. Trading these items would put anyone in danger, and it was revealed that the city heavily depended on dungeon rewards, stated the merchant. With the dungeon closed and the presence of Inquisitors and their prey, everyone would flee the city, so no one would buy the shop owner's goods, but the man kept begging. Even when the Earthling tried to negotiate with low prices, the old man still wasn't willing to buy. The old merchant feared the Earthling hunters. But before he could continue his explanation, one of them entered the shop, insinuating for him to wait in line. The presence of this person from the Church of Darkness, who terrified the shop owner, thanked him for introducing him briefly. Ryu immediately began to observe the Inquisitor. But when he tried to check his level, the panel was surprisingly blurred. Suddenly, the Earthling hunter approached the protagonist. The mysterious person who couldn't be identified by the system asked the muscular man if he couldn't see his level. But the protagonist denied it, thinking about the Inquisitor's quickness. After a brief confrontation of presences and some questions, the Earthling hunter discovered that Eric was an orphan from a remote village and a non-believer. The masked man found these facts about the hunter quite suspicious and indirectly accused him of being an Earthling. But the man once again denied the accusation, stating that he was a rookie, which made him even more suspicious. Suddenly, the Earthling hunter pulled out a wooden board. This item allowed the Inquisitor to reveal the true level of a given hunter, but to his surprise, the muscular man was only level 5. This twist was unexpected for the masked man as the hunter returned to his business. The shop owner was impressed by the young man's courage in front of the Earthling hunter. However, the old man couldn't buy his items because he had no customers. Ryu, who presumed he was out of danger due to his low level, kept his fear of being discovered hidden from the masked man. But as soon as he theorized that he couldn't see the man's level because of the mask, he was asked by the shop owner if the bracelet was for sale. This was the artifact he had obtained in the dungeon after killing the sub-boss. Ryu firmly denied it, but he accidentally pulled the bracelet from the old man's hand. And to the protagonist's misfortune, it rolled to the Inquisitor's feet. The masked man picked up the artifact from the floor. The Inquisitors seemed to have noticed the bracelet's property. With that, the air around the man changed as he questioned how a level 5 adventurer possessed an artifact. Ryu presumed he was out of danger and wondered if he should feign ignorance. The Inquisitor stated that a rookie shouldn't be venturing into dungeons, and to the protagonist's surprise, he returned the artifact and even asked him to take good care of it. But since Eric was a novice hunter, the masked man decided to teach him a lesson in the form of a story. 15 years ago, a veteran hunter lived with his family in a small eastern village. Despite not being the leader of the group, this man had the power to influence others, but it all started with one of his group's routine missions. However, he, the strongest of the group, was terrified by the supposedly harmless monster in front of him and his team, which confused his companions. When he was cornered by his colleagues, he shouted that the monster's level was well over 800. But when they didn't believe him, he had to confess his identity as an earthling capable of seeing everyone's levels. But at that moment, the monster discovered them. So the hunter stayed behind to give his friends some time to escape. This led the narrator to ask the listener who met their end in this story as expected. But when the novice adventurer stated that the veteran hunter was the one who died, the masked man corrected him. Only the hunter and the group's leader survived, while all the others the hunter knew perished. It turned out that the group leader only lost his job for reporting the case to the Church of Darkness, while the other members died being investigated for sympathizing with the enemy. To everyone's surprise, the man returned home. But no one was there to greet him because the villagers, terrified by the rumor, massacred his family and burned his house down. Then, driven by hate and rage, the man fled after massacring the village inhabitants. According to the Inquisitor, only misfortunes follow those beloved by Earthlings, but the muscular man must be innocent since he is only of a low level. Ryu asked the masked man why he told that story, and he explained that it had to do with Earthlings using novices to get rid of certain artifacts. These cases were quite frequent, but the masked man promised to use everything in his power to protect the innocent man. But the masked man's intentions were revealed when he asked the Earthling about his group. After hearing this, the protagonist was ready to punch the Inquisitor with all his strength, but a red-haired figure intervened between the two men. The protagonist halted his attack because of a person who politely bowed before the masked man. This person was Artis, who intervened because, according to him, the Inquisitor misjudged the situation. The protagonist asked the mage not to repeat such actions. Suddenly, Artis began yelling at the hero and scolding him for failing his simple duties, and so he pretended to be the one who gave the artifact to the muscular man. And before the Earthling ruined his act, he silenced him by continuously scolding him and insulting the priest, who then asked the man who he was. The mage introduced himself as Artis Bannister. He was the 37th leader of his family. The priest stated that the Bannister family, dragon hunters, should be among the fallen nobles, but the shining dragon emblem said otherwise. The Inquisitor apologized to the noble for not recognizing him as he was on official duty and asked who that man was to him. Artis pretended that Eric was his new assistant despite being dense as a novice, so the muscular man understood the mage's good intentions. Apparently, the artifact had been given by Artis to the novice for research, and yet he got himself into this situation. And with a comical and serious expression, the Earthling decided to join the act. And so the master apologized and took his assistant to continue their research, bidding farewell to the Inquisitor. Ryu thanked the man who criticized his acting skills. Eric admitted that he must have seemed suspicious to the mage since he was holding an artifact, but Artis assured him that it was just revenge for staying silent after seeing him in the forest. However, the Inquisitor became intrigued upon learning that the errand boy was the one who had obtained the precious magical artifact. So to confirm his suspicion, he asked the two liars about the bracelet's ability. But unfortunately for them, they contradicted each other. The muscular man said fire, while the other said electricity. It was at that moment they realized they had made a mistake. In that instant, the Earthling hunter's doubts were confirmed, and his mask began to glow white. With his wind, the Inquisitor was about to imprison Artis and Eric. On his first day of adventure with Buckman and the others, Eric was attacked by a tree ogre, but the level 13 monster was immediately cut down. On the same day, a small level 15 Pennock also tried to eat him, but the atrocity was defeated with a single punch. Despite escaping his tutorial world, the man was now stuck with these insignificant monsters. The experience gained from the magical dogs was much better than that of these forest monsters. At least back then, he could get more than 0 points after killing a monster. All the protagonist could think about was leveling up. The disintegrated monster beneath his feet gave him no XP. But suddenly, a voice brought him back to reality. Eric was in the tent with someone trying to get his attention. The voice was none other than Buckman, reassuring the protagonist since it was his first mission and offering him a special welcome meal, though he wasn't sure about the taste. But the cook of the meal took this statement as an insult and asked the tank to stop filling the rookie's head with such ideas. Amber served him a plate, stating that he should consider himself at war while on duty, claiming that she didn't recognize him yet. Ryu was suspicious of the plate when the support jokingly called him a picky eater. As strange as the food might be here, it certainly couldn't compare to the meat of the magical dog. But then he realized it had been a long time since he had a decent meal using a proper plate and spoon. The protagonist remembered how lonely his old hellish world was. But now, that feeling was part of the past. All the team members watched the young man as he ate his meal, and it was at that moment that a gentle smile appeared on the Earthling's face as he asked for his second serving. The young man really felt like he had escaped the endless tutorial. The Inquisitor's mask began to glow white. Both the mage and the swordsman were about to be imprisoned. The wind used by the masked man wasn't magic, according to Artis. It was the wind of healing, indicating that the mage was a high-level magical spirit. In that case, fighting the Inquisitor wouldn't be an easy task for the protagonist, and fighting seriously would reveal his identity as an Earthling. According to the priest, the lives of the two men would be spared if they stayed within the cyclone and the cost of their limbs. But he wanted them to surrender willingly. Seeing this, the protagonist realized there was only one way to resolve the situation and asked the man if he was looking for the one who closed the dungeon. The Inquisitor agreed to spare everyone else if the muscular man could find the dungeon closer since he didn't have much time. Ryu declared that he was the one who closed the dungeon. Suddenly, a noisy carriage entered the city. It was Raoul returning to the city with the two young adventurers he had saved from the dungeon, while one of them praised the man for closing the dungeon alone. The man assumed that he was the one who defeated the tentacle beholder and then took its core, but found himself starving on a plane after closing the dungeon. The young ones spotted the magical swordsman at the exit of Onfrost and considered rescuing him as repayment for saving them in the dungeon. And with that, the man assumed that his days of glory would begin. But to the young ones' surprise, their days of glory were cut short by the Church of Darkness, who arrested him. Raoul being the dungeon closer was something unexpected for the muscular man. He had simply assumed that the magical swordsman had turned into a monster, but even Artis was shocked by this news. The Inquisitor presented his apologies on behalf of his church, despite having done nothing wrong according to Ryu, but Artis was concerned about what would happen to Rude. He would be taken to a secret prison but would be released if Raoul just told the truth and had a clear birth record, which irritated the protagonist who wanted to keep the man behind bars. But in the end, Ryu was relieved that nothing went wrong because of the irritating man while he discussed the demon stone-powered vehicle with the noble. The Inquisitor then mentioned how he ruined the protagonist's item sale and asked him to come closer. The masked man was about to hand him a large check that he needed to sign. However, Ryu felt uncomfortable as he had been taught never to sign any paper without thinking twice. He assumed this was an attempt to enroll him in the Church of Darkness, but the masked man denied resorting to such low methods, unlike the Church of Light. Then the Inquisitor showed him a golden item. A tension was created between hunter and prey. With that, the priest left the city, leaving behind an irritated Ryu. Artis expressed his relief when the incident ended well, but Eric remained silent. This behavior intrigued the mage. The Earthling had a favor to ask of Artis. Meanwhile, at the ruined Onfrost Hunters Guild, the guild receptionist deeply apologized to Buckman. But he explained that it wasn't her fault that the guild master, who didn't even remember them, fled and praised her for keeping the place safe when everyone else hurriedly left. The girl asked the Lancer if they managed to make any profit with the demon stones. But when she threw 5 silver coins on the table, they both assumed that was all they got from selling the stones, but she denied it, stating that it was all the guild had left. The two young ones had trouble understanding. Then Amber angrily explained that they weren't called back by the guild master because they would have realized he was stealing all the money before fleeing. But Buckman tried to see the positive side, as thanks to the guild master, all drinks were free, but the Lancer didn't care since they had lost their source of income. Then he reminded her of the day he went to a remote village with no dungeons or guilds, claiming to have fought alone for 20 years when she saved him countless times. Buckman stated that he didn't care about the guild since he and the Lancer had been together ever since, so she pointed out that she was still single. Amber's face began to heat up as she tried to backtrack on what she said. But just as the man was about to confess, the support interrupted them because he found food. And just as he was about to suggest a party for Eric, the food in his hand was sliced by a silver coin thrown dangerously close to his face. Then Amber, with a murderous aura, proposed continuing the conversation after the party and that they should be alone. Buckman's party was as lively as ever. Someone was at the door. A mysterious person entered the guild. This turned the lively noise into focused silence on the new presence. Buckman's eyes widened as he saw the man. Artis had entered the guild building. Upon seeing this, the tank's eyes widened. For some reason, this mage was carrying his companion's bag. Artis was sweating from exhaustion. He then collapsed under the weight of the gigantic bag. After helping Artis and allowing him to rest, he praised Eric for carrying such a colossal weight around. The concerned group leader asked the mage why he was carrying the rookie's bag, and to his surprise, all the items inside it had disappeared. But Buckman asked about the bag's owner. Suddenly, Ember turned her attention to the bag with a face full of wonder. The bag was filled with money. a total of 10,000 EX. Buckman wondered how many items Eric had sold after seeing all that money. But Ryu also asked the mage to give the tank one more thing. This item made the Kaiman's eyes widen. Buckman received the guild badge of his newest recruit, and he asked the red-haired man why Eric had resigned. The mage didn't know the reason. The Earthling is wandering alone through the streets at night. Ryu appears terrified by something. When he accepted the check from the Inquisitor, who pulled out a mysterious object, the priest asked him if he knew what that object was. Seeing this, the Earthling immediately became frightened. The object was actually a golden badge. It had Great Earth written all over it with an image of the globe. The muscular man was terrified because this organization was supposed to have been obliterated by the 4 heroes 20 years ago. But he decided to stay calm and feign ignorance. Since Ryu was only level 5, the Inquisitor didn't expect him to know about it. But the pressure increased when the masked man pointed out that Eric was too weak to be an Earthling. The protagonist could feel the Inquisitor's threat entering his mind. But if he knew about the Great Earth, the man should only remember the veteran hunter. A strong punch obliterated a wooden object. The fist was none other than the protagonist relieving his frustration on a small wooden cart. Eric hadn't left his companions behind by choice, but that he noticed a light beside him. Eric came across 3 men smoking next to the wooden cart. These 3 seemed irritated that the muscular man had destroyed their things. Back at the guild, the rest of the group was shocked by the rookie's resignation. The young one was determined to see him and persuade him to return to the group, but Amber wasn't convinced. However, as they argued, a sensible tank told them to stop. Buckman couldn't force anyone to follow him because their job involved working under the wings of death all the time. But as Artist left, the tank had one last word for him. He asked him to inform his friend that they would always welcome him back if he decided to return to the group. So Artist stated that he would do his best to ensure Eric's return. But the group didn't care about the mage's word and was in their own little world, discussing their companion's sudden departure. The mage had no idea of the muscular man's problems and difficulties, and yet he couldn't help but feel some envy toward him. Water was thrown on Ryu's unconscious head. He was awakened by a thin and bony man, and Eric had no idea where he was. The tall, muscular man assumed that the unfamiliar Ryu was a hunter because of his sword and accused him of injuring his young men. The 3 men then added that he destroyed the cart, which made the dark-skinned man even angrier since he dared to rest in their territory. So Ryu apologized for the damage, stated that the 3 men injured themselves by attacking him, and that he had just rested in an abandoned house. The injured men confirmed the story but used his hardened body as an excuse to accuse him of using magic. But Eric denied using such methods and taunted the giant man, calling him a coward who couldn't think for himself. But the 3 behind the bald man denied having said that. Then the Earthling said they weren't telling the truth to push the big man to his limit. The bald man had had enough of Ryu, and he decided to silence him with a punch with all his strength. But the level 11 human broke his hand as he was even weaker than the monsters in the dungeons. Still, the protagonist now had to carefully think about his next move. He was surrounded by a crowd of armed men, but it would be easy for him to escape these ordinary humans. But when he abandoned the idea since he wanted to keep a low profile, an old man entered the scene, thinking the noise was caused by a monster attack. The boss said all the noise was caused by a man he referred to as a dog, not caring about the danger. But Ryu didn't like being called a dog, the enemy he had fought for so many years, and the beasts probably despised their slayer as well. Then, looking at the man trying to be imposing, the boss easily guessed the Earthling's tutorial world. So the old man told his subordinates to untie the muscular man they so feared. But the boss informed them that it was better to release him because he could kill them all in an instant while he easily broke free from the rope. The astonished Ryu wondered how the old man knew about his former world. Then the old man laughed in response and agreed to reveal the secret only if the Earthling accepted working for him. The story now shifts to 6 months after Raud closed the dungeon in the suburban area of the eastern castle wall in the city of Onfros. There you could find a poor, crumbling house. The men who captured the Earthling despised the building and took everything of value from it. But the woman occupying the house and her child didn't know what was happening. So the bald man told them that her husband should have informed her. The tall man was there to settle things once and for all with the man of the house who came running. After that, the armed man raised his sword against the dark-skinned man's subordinates. The man was determined to protect his wife and child along with his home despite being scared. But the leader didn't care and called for the hammer. The husband was speechless upon seeing the enormous weapon. The wielder of the object was none other than the protagonist himself, and it looked poorly made. But the homeowner decided to preserve his pride as a hunter and defend his home against the muscular man. Even so, the man's sword couldn't even pierce the Earthling's chest. With an emotionless look, Ryu ordered the man to step aside. The husband was speechless when his blade failed to pierce the chest of the hammer wielder. But the most impressive part was that Ryu's human body was capable of bending metal. And so the Earthling destroyed the man's house, who had called him a beast, with a single strike of his hammer. The family was left speechless at what they were witnessing. It turned out that the men who supposedly attacked them were actually part of the Onfros Architectural Association, who had built a splendid new house for the small family. The bald man and his team were tasked with restoring the city's castle walls and demolishing dilapidated houses. They were proud to provide a sturdy building as they used the same construction materials as the aristocrats, including mixed stone supported by golem magic. The house was also coated with a special slime resin to keep any hostility at bay, and if the residents approved, it could potentially be used by soldiers in case of an emergency. The bald man explained that in addition to living there for free, the husband would receive payment for supporting the castle walls. But when everything was explained, the owner of the new house fainted. He gently explained that they had done him a great favor since there wasn't much work left for hunters. But the man was mostly grateful to the one he had tried to stab and desperately tried to offer his sincere apologies. Ryu asked the bald man if he could leave, but the husband insisted on treating him to a good meal. Still, the depressed earthling insisted on going to make his report. The bald man didn't like how the hammer wielder rudely refused the family's kindness and hospitality. But the earthling became truly irritated when he was called strange. The homeowner immediately tried to stop the two builders before the situation escalated. Ryu was shaken when he heard the child call him a weirdo. The bald man started yelling at him while everything continued to spin. Even the homeowner's hospitality sounded like hostility to the protagonist. Eric couldn't think straight as the homeowner apologized to him once more. Even the innocent child's laughter sounded like mockery to the muscular man. The boy then ran to hug the earthling. But upon hearing the boy innocently call him a weirdo, the protagonist began to imagine him as an inquisitor. Because of this, the earthling's eyes filled with murderous intent. The frightened woman then hugged her son to protect him, and she sincerely apologized for treating him this way while he reached for the missing sword strapped to his bag. Ryu noticed his hands' unconscious movements and snapped back to reality. Then, to avoid causing more trouble, the muscular man left. The homeowner thought it was his fault that the hammer wielder was in such a bad mood, but the bald man reassured him, denying any grudge. Ryu was paid 600 EX for each job he performed, which was more than a middle-class hunter earned after a few months of work. He even became well-known among similar businesses in other cities, since his help significantly increased work ethic. But no soul managed to get close to the muscular man. Ryu rudely entered the president's office without knocking on the door. But the angry man didn't care about manners and demanded an explanation from the old man. The earthling was irritated by the design of the last house because it didn't belong to this world. And since the design was from another world, the president deemed it wise to send an earthling, even though he never spoke. At this point, the muscular man thought the old man was just toying with his nerves. After the president mentioned the old tutorial world, its former resident had been working under his orders for the past 5 months. In his rage, he destroyed the president's desk. A silence fell over the room as the papers on the desk quietly fluttered to the floor. Ryu was desperate for some answers and almost begged for them. This made the president find his attitude rather weak. The old man explained that 4 decades ago, everyone, including them, enjoyed life as humans. He stated that even those from other worlds enjoyed this way of life, which made the young man certain that this man was aware of the situation. The president asked the man if he knew why he always acted differently from the others. But when he said it was because he was an earthling, the old man denied it. His behavior was caused by him living differently from the locals of this world. As an earthling, Ryu only interacted with hunters, but 40 years ago, when his kind first appeared, there were more job opportunities outside of hunting, and they acquired great knowledge of other worlds. If Ryu restrained himself and lived quietly, no one would find him strange. The president then placed a paper on his desk for his strongest worker. The earthling was to avoid hunting after accepting this work request as a hunter. But as the muscular man was about to refuse the offer, someone knocked on the door. The president stated that he didn't need the muscular man at that moment, and he declared that the person at the door believed that the former hunter wouldn't reject the work offer. The mysterious person entered the room. Upon seeing this figure, the protagonist's eyes widened. The person at the door was none other than the mage from Raud's group. Ryu was surprised to see the red-haired mage there, while Artist was quite happy to see the muscular man in good health. The earthling confronted the old man about the mage knowing his location since he had to hide his face, but his distinctive muscular silhouette betrayed him. But when the president put on his sunglasses, he stated that Artist frequently visited, so he let her in and assured her that she would never be associated with Ryu again. However, the earthling pleaded with the old man, explaining that if Artist were associated with him again, it would only harm the young mage. The redhead introduced himself as Artist Bannister from the Onfrost Guild, but the old man decided to skip the formalities. The president was well aware of his worker's past as a hunter, but since he now worked for him, the old man considered the muscular man part of his family, and he regarded the work offer as an insult to him and his architectural association. But Artist stated that he wasn't formally there on behalf of the guild, but on a personal matter. The redhead explained that his presence in the group made a difference despite being a complete stranger. He continued by reminding them that Raud had protected him from the man when he saw them in the forest, which made the old man question the nature of their relationship. But when the mage mentioned that he was naked in the forest and didn't want to talk about it, the old man began to imagine the most inappropriate scenes between the two. But Eric assured his boss that nothing happened as he imagined, while Artist continued to explain. The mage then recalled how Eric gave him a huge promissory note so that he could stop hunting, which made the old man imagine him indecently. With that, the president put his feet up on his desk, having heard enough. The next second, the poor earthling was thrown out the window by the old man. The president, who assumed the mage was a woman, stated that the muscular man should take responsibility for his actions and that he wouldn't speak to him until he resolved the matter. Artist was happy to go on a mission with Eric, but the tall man was irritated because the mage had altered many things in the story. Ryu then complained that he had left his old job 5 months ago, but Artist reassured him, saying they were going on a safe mission as they were only collecting samples. To comfort him, he promised to protect the muscular man at all costs with an innocent smile and stated that they could talk normally since they were now comrades. A bright blue sky settled over the Sot forest. Artist and his backpack carrier were now making their way through the forest. Eric wondered why the red-haired mage chose him as a companion for this mission. Ryu speculated that the man might be aware of his dungeon incident, and if so, he wondered why he was acting now after a 5-month delay. The earthling decided to act normally so as not to raise any suspicions. A small level 2 Kalak was found by the muscular man. The creature started nibbling on the backpack carrier, who was surprised by its cuteness. But just as he suggested keeping the small Kalak as a pet, the creature was demolished by a flaming attack. It was Artist who ruthlessly killed the small creature with a fireball. The mage then panicked upon seeing his friend being bitten and began pouring potions on him to heal the tall man. Artist asked the stunned man to notify him if he spotted any symbols. The exploration of the forest continued as a small bird landed on the man's head, but Artist incinerated the small bird and continued burning everything in his path. He kept creating fire as his spell began to consume the forest. He explained that this hostile behavior was intended to protect them from any enemy monsters. The mage then turned to the level 5 to check on how he was doing. Eric, who had already had enough, asked him to stop using fire magic even if he had control over it. So the mage promised to restrain himself as much as he could. It was getting late. The law was quickly cut in half. Ryu was informed that the unpleasant Rowds group was the first that the fire mage had joined. Artist revealed that he wasn't close to the clumsy swordsman, wasn't familiar with groups, and had never slept outside, but he became a hunter to personally research materials. And since mages can level up just by researching, he didn't need to go out. So the muscular man started laughing at him, saying that he was hunting dragons while sitting in his house. But the young noble stated that he wasn't a dragon hunter like his family and that dragons were now rare to find. This news shocked the backpack carrier. He masked his excitement by pretending to be from a place without dragons, but he was quite interested in anything that could help him level up. Ryu pointed out how these fantastic beasts really were rare. Artists described them as monsters. Dragons were terrifying monsters that could scorch the earth with limitless magic and had giant wings that allowed them to dominate the sky, but that wasn't enough to terrify Artist. What he feared was their ability to level up after killing an opponent just like those from other worlds. Still, they were intelligent beasts with the ability to converse. It was possible that dragons hid away to live peacefully despite feeling lonely. Ryu then told the mage about his friend, the talking wyvern, who chose to hide to live without conflict. But the mage didn't believe him and started laughing as a talking wyvern sounded more like a joke to him. Artist slowly stopped laughing and was about to ask the earthling a serious question. The mage asked the sword wielder if he would reconsider hunting again. But when the muscular man said he didn't have the courage to return to Buckman's group, the redhead declared that he was forming his own. So Ryu asked the mage if he wasn't afraid that he would abandon him. Still, the earthling grew frustrated when Artist mentioned how he left Buckman and his friends to protect them. But there was no proof that the mage would betray the swordsman first. And since Eric was only level 5, it wouldn't matter if he betrayed the mage first. When the muscular man reached for his sword, he pointed out how this forest was quite isolated. Artist then pointed his magic wand at his comrade and apologized to him. Ryu calmly asked the mage to put away his wand. But before he could finish his sentence, Artist cast a spell in his direction. The redhead pointed out that the forest was more lethal than it appeared. Eric quickly dodged the shot that passed dangerously close to his head. It then hit a strange beast in the mouth. The monster's mouth was ablaze when Eric asked Artist for an explanation. The mage then explained that he burned the beast's lungs from the inside, which would prevent it from calling for reinforcements, and that it would soon die from suffocation. The earthling was impressed by Artist's skills, which were far superior to those of the mage from his former group. The fire mage asked the backpack carrier, who thought it was about demon stones, to open the monster's stomach, but he sensed that something was off. Normally, forest monsters stay away from humans, but our heroes had encountered an unusually high number of monsters today. The earthling seemed to have noticed something. It turned out that the kobold the mage killed should have been found in dungeons. Opening the furry monster's insides had nothing to do with demon stones, but something much more important. That night, 2 monsters were on top of a watchtower. After opening the monster's stomachs, our heroes found the finger of a man who surely lived in this dark village now occupied by kobolds. Since there were no other bodies nearby, the beasts had started hunting humans, and since they were dungeon monsters, Ryu asked if one had appeared nearby. But the mystery only deepened as if a dungeon had appeared, which would have notably changed the area's topography. Eric proposed returning to the guild and asking for help, but Artist seemed to have found something. A man hanging in the air by a rope was spotted by the fire mage, who assumed he was still alive. Eric had to stop the impetuous mage from jumping into action to save the hanged man. He suggested rethinking their course of action, as the man might already be dead. Then something hit the kobold watchman in the face. It was a small arrow with a blue crystal. Then the stone began to crack. After that, a massive explosion destroyed the watchtower. The optimistic artist who hoped the man was still breathing used a weapon that fires demon stones using magic as fuel. As the mage ran toward the center of the village, he asked the level 5 hunter to hide. Ryu was irritated by such a display of bravery since the poor man was already dead. The village was about to be engulfed in flames. Explosions began to cover the village. A figure behind the flames threw a demon stone at the back of a monster. As he observed the village, artists supposed that it had been months since the kobolds conquered this place, which explained why there were only monsters occupying the area. Something almost hit the fire mage's foot. Artist was surprised to find the kobolds hiding in the abandoned houses. He knew the kobolds' intelligence, but he never imagined they had mastered long-range attacks. However, the monster was shocked to see its friend pulverized by a flame that appeared out of nowhere. It was Artist who ignited the building from within, killing all monsters inside. These kobolds were fighting a fire mage while hiding inside closed houses. This strategy would lead to the beast's early destruction. However, one of them escaped the building with a spear. The fire mage's wand began to fade. The surviving beast let out a loud roar. Artist threw a demon stone at the kobold that attacked him with a spear. Unfortunately, the mage missed his target. Then he threw his deteriorating magic wand at the monster. Next, he pulled out one of the many wands he kept in his pocket, and the wand that Artist threw at the monster shattered on its head. This resulted in a massive explosion that eliminated the beast. The village was now in ruins as our heroes untied the dead man. Artist was saddened because Eric was right. The man he risked his life to save was already dead, and it appeared that he had died from the cold. But the muscular man had a hard time believing it since he never felt cold while living there. The dead man's emblem indicated that he was a level 27 hunter from the same guild as them. Ryu was surprised as there were many signs of hunters outside the village. After analyzing the situation, they concluded that they were looking for a place where hunters frequented and could disappear without anyone knowing. A dungeon seemed to be the place that best fit this description. Since the Ipan Plain dungeon had been closed for a few months, it seemed the most likely candidate, but the question remained about how people got from there to this village. Eric seemed to have found something important. Ryu's discovery might be the answer to his question. The mage was shocked by what he saw. The Earthling discovered a hidden and closed portal. But according to the fire mage, these vile creatures were too primitive to conceive such a portal. So the Earthling asked if the Taters would be capable of creating it. But Artist thought it was a joke since it would require at least a level 40 mage who knew spatial transition magic to open a small portal with limited range. And from the village to Ipan Plain, the Conjurer would need to be at least above level 60. This sent a chill down the muscular man's spine as he noticed something important. Ryu asked what they should do if the portal's creator was indeed an enemy. A cold presence filled the air as a mysterious figure approached our heroes. Artist was shocked by what he saw. As Eric prepared for the worst, a new enemy with a skeletal face appeared. The swordsman and the mage were now about to face a lich. Ryu pointed out that this new enemy had a high level. The level 72 lich was, in fact, a mage who slowly turned into a zombie after being resurrected inside a decaying body. But the person it sought seemed absent and declared that our heroes had fought against its kobolds. Then the monster began to analyze the traces left by Artist on the battlefield. The lich asked if Artist was a mage and if there was another presence with him as well. But when the muscular man was about to respond, he was interrupted by the fire mage as the undead man probably couldn't see or hear him. Since the creature relied on magic detection, it would be able to locate a mage but not a level 5 swordsman. Artist wanted to ensure his friend's escape. Suddenly, the lich fired an ice attack at the muscular man. It turned out that the lich could indeed see the muscular man as it unexpectedly had a functional eye. Artist was concerned about his friend's condition, but he reassured him, saying that the undead mage only hid his sword and asked him to focus on this new enemy. From the lich's presence and attack, the Earthling could sense its murderous intentions and magical abilities. The overwhelming undead was much stronger than the fire mage. The lich once asked his married colleagues about marriage, and one of them replied that it was about sharing the same goals and dreams. He was so impressed by this answer that he ripped out the eyes of a man named James and a woman named Katerina. The madmen used their eyes to declare them husband and wife. He then used his ice magic to easily block a sudden attack from the fire mage. The lich grew irritated because Artist and Eric didn't pay attention to his words. The flaming attack was quite powerful, but the undead managed to block it with ease. Ryu noticed that his companion had aimed poorly, but that wasn't the case. It was the level 72 undead mage who curved the spell's trajectory with his own power. The lich enjoyed parrying the young mage's weak attack and took great pleasure in witnessing the struggles of the two men. But Artist didn't give up and decided to use his demon stone weapon. After firing the weapon, he urged the muscular man to escape, and to the monster's surprise, the projectile actually hit him. The demon stone began to crack. A massive explosion struck the undead while our heroes tried to escape, but the protagonist didn't understand why the demon stone actually hit its target. Since the undead was immune to physical damage, he didn't think to block the demon's stone, which wasn't mana and couldn't move because the surrounding mana had exploded. And since the forest was filled with mana, the monster would have difficulty tracking Eric and his mage friend. But the Earthling felt uneasy. He felt as if his capture was certain. Suddenly, our protagonist stopped Artis from advancing. The fire mage didn't have time to react on his own. Eric saved him from being impaled by the dome of fissures that rose up. This spell trapped them in a frozen area. A gigantic ice prison dome was formed by the Lich in the middle of the forest. And even though they were trapped in a unique spell, our heroes needed to focus on the fight. Eric and Artis risked freezing to death like the hanged hunter from before. And unfortunately for the fire mage, the mana around them was affected by the cold. Our heroes were in a difficult situation since the fire mage couldn't activate his spell. This happened because fire magic, which burns mana, is the opposite of ice magic, which freezes it. The Lich finished his explanation by stating that he had simply canceled the mana's ignition with his ice magic. Then the monster decided to freeze the muscular man and the fire mage. And for that, the Lich used a freezing storm. Ryu would easily withstand the icy wind. This resistance was probably caused by his high attributes, but not everyone could endure the cold. The freezing storm was severely affecting the fire mage. The undead mage assumed that the hunters must have been tortured by the mana freezing inside their veins. Then he promised to end them peacefully if they would only lose consciousness. And since the skeleton didn't plan to finish off the young mage quickly, the Earthling decided to fight seriously after Artis lost consciousness. This was the only way he could continue living as a human. But Artis apologized to the protagonist. The struggling mage admitted that he only thought of himself. Artis then pointed his wand at his own heart and proceeded to ignite the mana within his body, causing him to writhe in agony. Seeing this, the swordsman assumed that the mage had gone mad. But the undead mage was ecstatic and thrilled by this spell. The insane fire mage ignited the mana within his own body to prevent it from freezing, but it was painful to endure. Ryu was worried about his friend, but he seemed to have something important to say. Artis told him to flee immediately if a hole was formed in the dome, no matter what happened. This made Ryu think the mage had gone mad since he wouldn't be able to defeat the Lich alone, but he didn't care and wanted the swordsman's word. Eric, who was speechless, had no other choice after seeing the fire mage's determination. Artis could now fight with a clear mind since the level 5 gave him his word. The undead mage was eager to face the young fire mage's next spells. With that, the fierce noble pulled out several wands. He then threw 3 of them into the air. A spark was created when the stone on top of each one made contact and shattered in midair. This resulted in a massive explosion. It was powerful enough to launch the undead mage into the air. The Lich assumed the explosion was caused by the demon stones on top of the wands and opened the dome to weaken it, wondering if it was a form of camouflage or a last resort. Then to be sure, the skeleton covered his eyes and used his mana detection. But the explosion of the demon stones, now turned to dust, blocked the Lich's hearing and mana detection. Without any trace of Artis, the Lich had no way to locate him. He then thought of the dungeon that had been sealed. Suddenly, a giant worm emerged from the smoke, ready to bite the monster. The Earthling finally understood the nature of the presence he had felt half a year ago in the forest. He also realized why Artis had been naked on that occasion. Eric could hardly believe his own eyes. The true nature of the fire mage was finally revealed. To everyone's surprise, Artis was a real dragon. The worm asked the protagonist to trust him for now, even though he couldn't explain properly. The Lich was also impressed by this revelation. He was ecstatic at the presence of a dragon. And he was just a baby worm, born a century ago, which explained his excessive use of fire magic. But when the monster mentioned that red dragons could use fire from birth, Artis asked him to stop spreading such rumors. The Lich decided to take the opportunity to learn more about this fantastic creature. With that, he unleashed a powerful snowstorm as he prepared to face a dragon. The undead mage was eager for the countless XP points he would gain after defeating the rare creature. He then channeled his ice magic in hopes of analyzing the dragon's abilities. But the Lich was overwhelmed by the flames. The monster was thrown against the walls of the ice dome. Despite not being fully mature, the worm was still a fierce dragon. He was far superior to human power, so killing him with cold might be impossible. But the Lich needed to end this as quickly as possible. The Earthling was impressed that the baby dragon's flames were strong enough to melt the ice dome's walls, but the problem was his level. Artis the fire dragon was only level 52. The dragon was about to unleash a devastating attack. While concentrating his magic, Artis asked Eric to hold his position. The dragon had just used a powerful fire arrow. The Lich was terrified by the concentration of heat mana coming his way, but he was only pretending to be scared since he could easily dodge such a direct fire attack. But the real problem was the ice mana filling the dome. As fire magic slowly dissipated in this dome, the dragon was doomed to waste his strength before damaging the ice walls. After thinking this through, the Lich finally understood the reason for the baby dragon's struggle. Artis was worried about Eric, who told him to focus solely on the battle. Now the undead mage would have to fight seriously, as he was facing a fire dragon, so the Earthling declared that he could fight on his own. Our protagonist unexpectedly found himself the target of ice magic projectiles but managed to dodge them easily. but Artis used his limb to protect the human, suffering damage in the process. He then began scolding the level 5 for acting recklessly. But Eric assured the baby dragon that he should focus solely on his undead enemy for now. Suddenly, the Lich came flying toward them, attacking the dragon's face. He was surprised that an all-powerful being suddenly decided to protect a mere human. The undead mage assumed that the beast using its body to protect a hunter was actually under someone's control. Artis was in a difficult situation since not even his dragon form was a match for his skeletal enemy, but at least he could evacuate the muscular man. The dragon then ignited the wand that was stuck in the ice wall. The Lich theorized that Eric was actually the beast's meal, and that he was only trying to protect his food. But Artis had heard enough from the chatty skeleton. He began to unleash his flames in all directions while the undead easily dodged all of them. The Lich saw himself as a being, just like Artis, beyond humanity, and he wondered why they had to live in the shadow of the human race while the dragon melted his ice spikes. The Lich stated that he considered humanity a powerless race inferior to him, while Artis tried to incinerate him. But the undead mage emerged unscathed from the dragon's attack. The Lich claimed that humans should fear monsters like him and treat them as gods. But before he could finish his sentence, the red dragon managed to hit him with a punch. The ice dome's wall was damaged as the skeleton was thrown out by the dragon's fist. All these efforts were exhausting for the baby worm, but the undead didn't suffer any damage after such a deadly blow, and he began to fall from the ice dome walls. But he managed to drive 2 ice blades into the baby dragon's legs. The Lich remained calm and stated that he wouldn't have been in danger if the dragon had been at a higher level. The Earthling couldn't bear to watch and wish that his draconic friend would lose consciousness peacefully. But then Artis asked Eric if he feared him because of his true nature. The Earthling denied it, stating that he had seen creatures much scarier than a baby dragon. Eric told the red dragon that he actually found his size amusing, but Artis took it as a joke. Artis wanted to get to know his friend better, but he acknowledged that his time was running out and finally asked his comrade to keep his word and escape. Suddenly, the wand stuck in the ice wall exploded. At last, the hole was opened in the thick wall of magical ice. The Lich was shocked to see an opening form in his ice trap. Artis told the protagonist to escape before being trapped again, but the Earthling was more concerned about the dragon. But the dragon advised the man to keep his word, saying that he would stay behind to defeat the skeleton. Ryu suspected that Artis planned to engage in a fight to the death with the Lich so that he could save himself. So he decided to witness the monster's battle from outside the dome. The undead mage was surprised to see the dragon putting so much effort into saving a single man. Ice spikes began to form at the dome's exit. The ice filled the sky as the Lich activated his large-scale freezing magic, and so the Lich used his storm of blades. The sharp blades began to fall from the sky as Ryu wondered where he had gone wrong. Perhaps it was because he assumed he could block the spikes. Or maybe he was wrong for not telling Artis that the hanged hunter had already met his end. Or for not facing the high-level enemy seriously. It could also be the result of wanting a normal life. The blood-covered Earthling had difficulty understanding the situation. The baby dragon selflessly used his body as a shield to protect his human friend. A large part of the ice dome disappeared, and several ice fragments pierced the dragon's flesh. The protagonist only dreamed of existing as a normal human. That was his only wish. Artis used his body as a flesh shield to protect the muscular man. The impressed Lich found no more pleasure in this fight. Artis was a simple monster despite being a dragon, according to the undead mage. Ryu immediately checked on the dragon's condition. The Earthling wanted to know if his friend would survive, but the red dragon, relieved to see his comrade safe and sound, reassured him, saying that he could still fight. But Eric didn't believe in his tough attitude, thinking that his friend would eventually succumb. And as the ice fragments began to melt, there was nothing left to seal the wounds and stop the dragon from losing blood. This left the muscular man uncertain if the dragon would survive even if the undead mage was defeated. And even if the dragon survived, healing him with potions would be impossible in his dragon form, but the human didn't want to reveal his true form in front of him. But Artis didn't want to see the level 5 with such a sad expression, since the dragon, who desired more power, assumed he was the only one to blame. Artis apologized for failing to protect Eric as promised. The Earthling couldn't believe that the dragon had gone so far to keep his word. Artis was gravely wounded, but the dragon looked up at the sky. The Lich used his ice magic to create a giant blade while lamenting the dragon, who had been raised and influenced by humanity. He then began questioning the dragon, asking if he enjoyed feeling strong by protecting those weaker than him. The Lich considered this way of life a farce created by the weak to gain the protection of the strong. The giant ice sword of judgment was now ready to strike down our heroes. Then the undead mage tried to persuade Artis that Eric would betray his secret if he managed to escape alive. So the Lich would allow the dragon to join them if he eliminated the muscular man. Artis agreed. Artis agreed that both he and the undead mage were perceived as monsters by the human race. But when a monster renounces its humanity, it risks ending up as badly as the Lich. A smile formed on the protagonist's face as he heard the dragon declare that he would be human until his last breath. This statement confused the one who had given up his humanity. And with that, the giant ice sword of judgment was launched at our two heroes. Eric found it amusing because the dragon had put all this effort into a meaningless promise. but Artist stated that keeping that promise is as difficult as trying to be human. However, something seemed to have caught the dragon's attention. The Earthling charged directly at the giant ice sword. Artist considered this madness as the muscular man prepared to leap. But with a determined expression, Ryu declared that, like the dragon, he also wished to be part of humanity. And with that, the protagonist jumped high into the air to confront the gigantic ice sword. While the undead mage was impressed by this leap, he thought Eric was merely hastening his own demise. The Lich underestimated the muscular man for being level 5. The Earthling used a horizontal strike. His opponent was baffled as his skull was shattered. The blow was so strong that his own shirt tore apart. The giant ice sword was also shattered, but the horizontal strike was so powerful that even the ice dome was affected. The gigantic prison made of ice magic was completely destroyed by the wave of the attack. The shattered giant blade flew through the air. It landed right next to the red dragon, who struggled to process the situation. Artist was shocked because the dome had barely cracked when he exploded it from within. Yet the swordsman destroyed it with a single sword strike. Moreover, he even wounded the undead against whom a dragon was powerless. Artist was astonished because all these incredible feats were accomplished by a mere level 5. But the Earthling warmly asked his friend not to be mad at him since they had both hidden their true identities. The surprise with this statement is whether there was any magic capable of bypassing the evaluation stone. While they were still talking, vines sprouted from the ground trying to trap them. Certainly, that is summoning magic, and the Earthling is already irritated and out of patience with it. It's the skeleton's last resort, which he didn't want to use, and they grow stronger as they absorb energy. Not even the one who summoned them is able to stop what is happening. Now he awaits the bodies he will recover. More impressive than that was the destroyed body rising again, but the dragon says that a lich can do that as long as it has leftover mana. Knowing this won't make a difference anymore, but he would like to know how the boy disguised himself as a level 5. Before getting an answer, an isometric contraction of his muscles, chiseled from juice, broke the vines. Convinced that he had secured his victory, the Lich no longer knows what to make of this absurdity. There's no way he did that with brute strength alone. It's possible the Lich is hallucinating and doesn't realize it. Now the boy wants to ask him a little question because he never mentioned anything about levels. It's time for him to say how he knew about them. Dying wasn't all that bad, as his life on Earth wasn't a wonderful thing. And in this second life, he tried everything to be more cautious because he didn't want to go through death again. He needed a meticulous plan to get the undead scroll, and now he possessed death and fear. That's what he thought until he encountered this absurd existence. The dragon, although he knows him, is always surprised by these absurd displays of strength. Those dangerous tentacles were wiped out with just one attack aimed at the ground. Observing the destruction he caused, he'd assure that this time there should be no bones left. But he was wrong. The Lich had reconstructed itself once again. Furious, he wants to know who this is and what he is. This strength isn't natural, and talking bones aren't either. Both sides have their curiosities. But so far, no one has admitted he is a level 5, so only 2 possibilities remain. The first is that he could be a seer, a good one. The other possibility is that he doesn't belong to that world. Uninterested in staying there to respond or be attacked again, the Lich takes off running. As he flees in terror, many thoughts race through his empty skull. Already regretting underestimating him, he is starting to believe the boy came there just to hunt him down, knowing he's from another world. Before he can continue his troubled thoughts, the boy is already in front of him, ready to stop his escape. With a single blow, the pile of bones was thrown to the ground. The impact leaves a trail of destruction and a large mark in the earth. Quickly getting up, he does everything possible to escape from that being more terrifying than himself. The boy is indignant because it's due to people like that Lich that nice guys like him have to suffer. Meanwhile, the Lich is not at all interested in continuing the conversation and is only thinking about completing his escape. To protect himself, he made a massive summoning of an Ice Knight, hoping to buy some time. But it wasn't agile enough, and the summoning did make the boy shift his focus. He is still dedicated to stopping the Lich. His blade is getting closer and closer to him. The strike is imminent. With the impact, the Lich suffered a serious orthodontic loss. His teeth flew like small puzzle pieces from a horrible puzzle. The force of the blow is so great that, even though it's a cut, the skeleton's whole body goes flying. Not far away, the dragon watches everything happening, knowing his friend has already surpassed the limits of mortal beings. But even that strength is too much for this standard. It's possible he's wielding aura. However, it doesn't matter. All the blows so far have been insufficient to stop the Lich's regeneration. Terrified, he asks if he isn't being attacked with aura to be taken as a reward to the Inquisitors. If that's the case, he promises to pay up to 3 times the reward, but the boy has no idea what that even is. He just wants the skeleton to come down and stop running, and he throws several small stones toward him, resembling a shotgun blast. This regeneration is already wearing down his patience, and the dragon asks Eric to use his aura. Only with aura strikes will the regeneration be interrupted. He knows this and also knows that as they gain levels, swordsmen learn to use aura. But he can't use it because of his level, and the dragon tries to teach him how to use this ability. But here's something he didn't expect to hear. It's hard to believe he doesn't use aura. Even the Lich didn't see that coming, that Eric is incapable of using aura. A barrage of ice projectiles is directed at Eric, who has his back turned. He repels them easily and warns the Lich that such an attack is completely useless against him. Likewise, attacks without aura cannot harm the Lich, who is now more confident. Seizing the opportunity, he directs his attack at the injured dragon. A low blow, and he asks the boy not to worry about him. Being faster than the projectiles, he defends his friend, even though he's aware that the attack was a distraction. He just didn't imagine it was to gain distance from him, rather than to escape. Around the skeleton, several huge ice plates appear. If he can't use aura, it's possible to hurt Eric's body. It's fine that he can block magic, but he must be completely vulnerable to mana use. A blue, icy vortex begins forming at the Lich's position. He's ready to condense all the mana he can, and with it, atomize the boy's body. A massive shot sweeps the path toward Eric. The light emitted by the beam is strong and intense, causing the dragon to cover his eyes. Opening them slowly, he's confronted with the improbable happening. Eric was standing with his blade raised. Before him, a wall had risen containing the Lich's attack. That was raised solely by brute force, with no effort on his part. Even so, it wasn't going to last long under the intensity of that attack. Now the dragon is worried and wants to join the battle, because if Eric can't use aura, he can't do anything about this situation. But the dragon needed to be a little more patient, because ever since they first saw him, it's clear that he's been wearing down. Curious, he wielded his sword to approach, as he wants to confirm his theory up close. He walks across the frozen ground, lifting the snow that forms with his steps. Adis still hasn't understood what he means by this. Faster than the eye can see, Eric was no longer there. He advanced down the path, using the ice beam as a long corridor leading to his destination. The Lich watches what happened, incredulous. Eric continues to advance. That condensed mana before him and nothing are synonymous. The tip of his sword keeps clearing the way. The Lich is growing more and more terrified, and if he had a heart, it would have already stopped from pounding so hard. The mana beam is split cut. The figure of Eric is now visible to the Lich. The heat generated by the friction of his blade separates the condensed mana even further. Eric was already close enough to the Lich. His sword had collided with the epicenter of that source of magical energy. Unable to react in any way, the Lich finds himself caught in the grip of Eric's hand. Now both are face to face, and the Lich can do nothing more against this person. Finally, observing him up close, he noticed there were several cracks in his skull, cracks that hadn't been there before. This realization of the obvious made the Lich feel fear. That is, he can be damaged enough to turn into dust, and now the Lich is terrified. While he screamed, a formation of mana enveloped him as if sprouting from his bones. A large ice formation appeared suddenly. This was the opportunity he sought to escape, or at least try. He had already defeated many powerful enemies. It couldn't be possible that this person could take him down. Worse than that, an enemy completely incapable of using aura. Falling to the ground, he realized something was missing from his skeletal body. His little legs were incomplete. Just as surprising as that was the view he had of the ice fortress he had summoned. Besides being shattered, Eric had emerged from it without showing any effort. In one of his hands was the missing part of the Lich's anatomy. In possession of them, terror crept through the creature, who begged him to stop. Without any concern, he began scraping the Lich's bones on his sword, so they would start turning to dust. Faced with that terrifying scene, the Lich screamed repeatedly for him to stop doing that. But the creature's scream was motivation for Eric, who scraped them even more vigorously. In the open field, a dragon lies where it crash-landed. Addis is tired and weakened. Eric opens a potion, ready to pour it on the creature. After that, she returns to her human form. Covering him, Eric wants to know why he always ends up naked when he transforms, to which Attis replies that clothes tend to tear during the process. What he really wants to know is the fate of the Lich they were fighting. At the moment, the Lich is completely immobilized. His arms and legs had turned to dust, worn away by the friction with Eric's blade. And to ensure he stays truly immobilized, Eric's sword is embedded in his body, preventing any movement. He may not use mana, but he can destroy the skeleton's mana sources, which now can't even move, let alone attack. Seeing that the Lich is still alive, Eric tells his friend that the Lich's central structure is quite resilient. There was no other way to deal with him. But Attissi knows how difficult it is to try capturing someone without them perishing in the process. Not to mention that beings of the same kind are even harder to face, as some lack the courage to kill. Eric asks his companion if he knows who he really is, but there is still something they need to discover about the Lich. Seeing the dragon approaching, the Lich wants to know if he's come in his human form just to mock him. Holding one of his bones in his hand, energy begins to pass from one body to another. In the process, the Lich began to scream in pain. As he agonizes, Eric asks if the undead are capable of feeling pain. A small amount like that wouldn't do anything to people, but since Liches are made of mana, the process is torturous. If the Lich is interested in continuing to live, it would be best for him to tell the truth from now on. Addis wants to know who the companions he mentioned are and why he hunts inexperienced hunters. As a small mist comes out of the Lich's mouth, from it emerges a coin rolling across the ground. Eric picks it up and examines it for a moment. Smiling, the Lich says that a young dragon definitely doesn't understand how life really works. If he were at least 500 years old, he would know, because their race has already joined them and Hissy knows nothing about it. On one side of the coin is what appears to be a planet. The Lich says he wants everyone to witness the destruction of Earth in the afterlife. With that, he clenched his glowing teeth, which began to crack. He became a strong source of luminous energy, blinding Eric. The same happened with Attis, who still doesn't know what's going on. An explosion of apocalyptic proportions engulfed them. Elsewhere, someone is gathering supplies for camping, including 2 very fluffy blankets, as well as combs, brushes, and nail clippers. The dragon had gathered everything she needed and was now ready to set off on her journey. She tries to say goodbye to her former home as she drags a backpack larger than herself. Her things are too heavy, perhaps she needs to get rid of some of that load. But she still hasn't accepted that idea, and just imagining it brings tears to her eyes. It took her an entire lifetime to accumulate everything there, and she doesn't want to part with her things. Unfortunately, a lot of strange things have been happening lately. A forest fire ended up destroying her entire garden. Another day, while trying to sleep, a large ice boulder nearly crushed her. And then there was an earthquake so strong that she thought the continent was split apart. These things have been keeping her from sleeping, and her scales are already in terrible shape. For her, the blame for all of this lies in helping that traveler from another world. But she's just a wyvern and nothing more. While she laments, a figure appears at the entrance to her cave. Quickly, she shifts her focus to what was there. But now, there's nothing anymore. She needs to hurry and leave because she thinks something bad is going to happen, and a man is surprised that this wyvern can talk. Apprehensive, she doesn't know how to explain how he got in, let alone that he overheard her talking to herself. Raising his hand in a friendly manner, the man asks her not to be frightened, as he's only looking for a friend. She says no one lives there, to which the man replies that's precisely why finding him is so difficult. Trying to end the conversation, she says she hasn't seen a human the past year and can't help more than that. The man doesn't believe her and says she must have seen him, because his friend is actually a skeleton. The skeleton's teeth glow increasingly blue. He closes his mouth, ready to make his final move. Those teeth must be magic stones, and the skeleton must be completing his self-destruction. Even using the mana he has left, there's nothing more he can do now. Eric wants to know what that is, but the dragon can only tell him to run away immediately. For he was about to explode, but his strength failed him and he was unable to complete the act. His hair spread across the ground as he collapsed. At what would have been the epicenter of the explosion, there was now a massive crater. Inside it, the woman asks if someone had dropped a bomb there. Turning to the man, whose name is Richard, she wants to know what was written in the guide. From the residual traces of mana, it must have happened just over a week ago. And surely that was the self-destruction of Shin Ha-jun. Curious that this happened, as he became a lich because he was afraid of dying. Before her friend could respond, a man appeared beside her, asking Leslie, as she was called, what she was doing there. Her first move was to draw the blade she carried to attack the man. He defended himself skillfully, without being too surprised. Then he told Alejandro that he had already warned him not to touch her if he wanted to keep both hands on his body. As long as she healed him with her magic, there wouldn't be a problem. Even more enraged, she asked if he wanted to be sliced into pieces. The conflict between the two escalated, and a large cut was made in the ground. It was Richard who had stopped the dispute, and it was him who attacked to make them stop fighting. Faced with this, he said that Alejandro had arrived late, so he would say it again. The skeleton was dead. The explosion had been caused by him in his final moments. There were no signs of the enemy, and you should be a little more respectful. With that, he found it odd that the lich exploded, and so did Leslie, as he was level 72, but that wasn't her main concern. What's strange is that the explosion happened there because on his way there, he saw another clearing where the battle must have taken place. It's possible he self-destructed outside of combat, but there is no other energy present besides his own. Eric's simple and brilliant solution was to kick the lich's head like a soccer ball. It was the only thing he could do to create some distance. After that, the head simply exploded. But he hadn't used enough force for it to explode, and Actis said the explosion was caused by self-destruction. Since his friend was knocked out, he jumped over the wall back to the city. Not knowing where he lived, he went to the house of the head of the Builders Association, but he ended up being thrown out. After causing trouble, he was hunted by the guards. He ended up finding some smugglers. After that, he got a little busy into Actis. He was more dangerous than the lich. In the end, everything worked out and his friend was awake thanks to the old man from the association. He has no idea how someone as strong as him exists, and for that, he is grateful. He can't even imagine what would have happened to him if he had been captured by the lich, a demonic creature from another world. He tries to backtrack, realizing he was too specific when he mentioned the other world, but Eric says that where he came from, there were also bad people. But he prefers to live a normal life in this world rather than become a sick person. Addis didn't know there were people from other worlds here, and Eric confirms that many of them end up becoming assassins, while others live normal lives. His fundamental difference from them is that his guide is defective. Addis wants to know if this guide is the demonic power they received from Ornphalus. Indeed, it is, one of them being the ability to see levels, and the other must be something secret the user is unaware of. For Atis, there must be something that compels these people to commit murders. Perhaps the problem with his guide makes him always appear as a level 5. But even so, he has no idea how severe this defect is. He fears that he might go insane and turn into a killer like the others. As a consequence of this possibility, nothing good will come from them continuing their relationship. Since he has a lot of money saved and nothing tying him to that place, he said goodbye to his friend. Addis clutches the blanket on the bed and says his name is Actis Emphadir Ragnaraka, a fire dragon, one of those created by the malice of Kivriel, and that fire dragons are known for keeping their word. And he is a fire dragon like his ancestors. With that, he is determined to fulfill and honor all his promises. Eric looks at him in admiration. He says his name was Reeve Haben, a former soldier, and with that, he left the room. Night falls on the city and a carriage passes through the gates. Eric had to take the carriage to its destination, and with the documents, he will be able to pass through the city gates. His new identity will be with the agent. He should pick up the things from him and dispose of the carriage. He wants to know what he'll do with that money, but the old man said it's a small price to send a problematic person far away. Thanking him, he says he'll repay the favor, but he wants him to promise something. He should never, in his life, kill anyone, because that's when he'll become a monster. Recognizing the wisdom in the advice, the old man said he'd keep that in mind. As he leaves, Eric says that one day he'll come back to visit him. Before going in, he stood outside for a while. Looking up at the sky, he asks the entities to protect them. Elsewhere, the Wyvern is landing. That is the place where the Lich's fight happened, but there are only traces of his energy and someone much weaker. She laments because of all the bad things that could happen if she was captured by the Great Land. Leslie doesn't believe the Lich would be defeated by something so weak, but the young man checked everything he could and there are no more signs left. If that's the case, the only possibility is that he was obliterated purely by physical force. Collecting the dirt from the ground, he says that there are some creatures that could take down a Lich using only strength. A dragon that has lived for over 500 years could turn bones into dust, and there's dragon blood in that place, which means they hope to find his whereabouts. In the shadow of the trees, he doesn't know what to do now. With the wheel broken, he can't continue his journey. If he stays still, he'll lose all the items from the carriage, and in the bushes, thieves are watching him, thinking it's a trap. They were supposed to have the courage to follow his orders. One of them steps forward, greeting what could be a merchant. Seeing that the carriage is broken, he offered to help him unload the cargo. And he should be honored that Kalendor, the bandit from Black Gorge, is offering his help. While being threatened, Eric lifts the carriage with just one hand to retrieve the wheel. As he places it in the correct position, the bandit's henchmen flee. His journey continues along the road. He couldn't find the way, but he was very lucky that Kalendor was able to read it. The fact that Kalango appeared made him very happy, but Kalendor corrected him, saying his name was Kalendor, not Kalango. Threateningly, Eric asked if he had said something, and the bandit quickly replied, "No, my name is Shitty Kalango." But now he should look to the side. On the horizon, he sees the city, much larger than Onpras. The dungeon city of Heighton, with a large gorge beside it, is the biggest and most famous dungeon in the entire north. He wants to know if it's dangerous, but the entrance is at the bottom, and monsters rarely escape. Having to go down all that way wouldn't be great for him, and finally, they had arrived. The line is quite long, and entering may be difficult since the city is so large. But he has all the necessary paperwork, and Kalango manages to make his escape. He was almost caught at a checkpoint, but bumped into something. It was Eric, much to his displeasure. He does everything he can to be released, fearing he might be captured there. Since it's Eric's first time in the city, he doesn't know how things work. At the bottom of the crater is a prison, and that's where the detainees are sent. Filled with cruel people, a highway bandit like him wouldn't last long. And recently, they captured someone from another world, someone who even makes the prisoners afraid. This piqued Eric's curiosity. While he continues to beg, a guard approaches, thinking something might be wrong. And from Kalango's hands, a bag of coins falls. Eric says his employee had resigned, but that he has the papers to enter the city. He just needs to finish his business there, and the bandit doesn't know what that money is for. Hearing the question, Eric says it was very difficult to start life with just the clothes on his back. So he should rethink his life and change his choices from now on. Kalango says he'll make good use of those coins. Eric feels quite satisfied. Only then does he realize he gave the wrong bag, the one with the gold coins. What he had in his pocket were copper and silver coins. Looking back, he hoped to find Kalango nearby, but he had already disappeared. There's a sign in the hallway. Along the way, many people are advertising services. The travelers finally enter the city. Without little money, it won't last long. He's in quite a bind. He's already thinking that he'll have to go back to working in construction. Maybe that's his true calling. It's more money than some hunters make, and perhaps leaving there had been a mistake. Looking around, Eric hopes to find a sign for the Builders Association. But instead, he comes across one looking for a military veteran. However, it's not just the sign that catches his attention. It's his friend who's standing there. Thinking about what could happen, he grabs him from the crowd and begins to flee the area. Since the city is large, he manages to escape with him. Now, in another place, the two are sitting down having coffee. There are a few places like that in the city, and every time he drinks tea like this, he feels like he has no worries. Finally calmer, he wants to know how his friend got there in just 2 days. Besides arriving so quickly, he also wants to know what Attis is doing there. However, Attis doesn't understand the excitement and asks if the old man hadn't told him anything. To keep his identity as a dragon a secret, he was supposed to meet an agent in that city. But Eric, while grateful for the consideration, thinks he's a magnet for problems and prefers to be left alone. Lamenting having wasted money on buying such a big house, Eric asks if Attis will become the leader. But with someone as strong as Eric, there's no one else who could be the leader even though he feels inferior for being level 5. His goal is to remain discreet and level up so he can speak to the deities. His immediate problem is that the monsters are of no use for that, and he asks if there's water to drink. In the kitchen, he came across a refrigerator. He can't believe that exists there, and Attis says that people from other worlds always underestimate that one. He had already lost hope of drinking cold water whenever he wanted. He placed his hand on the door to open it. To his dismay, his level is too low to do so. He needs to be at least level 10. Furious, he tried to destroy it, and Attis says that it's a magical item, which is why the level is required. Frustrated, Eric says that in his world, there weren't these level problems. Unable to do anything, he headbutts the refrigerator while Attis explains that these items are made by the Demon King. Still without hope, Eric doesn't understand the connection. Attis had come to a conclusion on how he could show himself without issues despite his level. Contrary to what people think, it's a very simple solution. All they need to do is take out Hanbin. They went to the Hunters Guild headquarters in the city of Heighton. Inside, people couldn't stop marveling at what they saw. His presence caused a huge commotion. At the counter, the woman says his measurement reads level 37 and his hunter registration is complete. With the papers in hand, he thanked her. At the adjacent counter, the other attendant said it's been a while since a handsome hunter showed up, and she was quickly served by someone else, not her. She was left to help the shirtless guy who looked like a rogue. Embarrassed, she said he should put on some clothes as even the other hunters were feeling uncomfortable. His stern, wordless gaze was his only response, and the attendant apologized for what she said. Grabbing the measurement stone, she said she'd check his level now. An onlooker remarked that it's the first time he's seen such a show-off, and having a chiseled body doesn't mean you have a chest of steel. His friend says it wouldn't be wise to measure the shirtless guy's level, but the attendant insists it's necessary. Worried about what might happen, he watches the scene. Eric takes the stone in his hands and squeezes it. Fully committed to his role, he declares the stone is evil, and that he needs to do something about it. Crushing it, he says his body should never be tainted by such evil energy. Shards of the stone fly across the hall, to the astonishment of those who witnessed the peculiar scene. With just one hand, it was truly impressive. But more than that, he also called the stone evil. Attis is pleased with how things have unfolded as people are now commenting that a person with that kind of strength doesn't seem real. Faced with this, the attendant wants to ask a personal question, but fears it might be rude. What she wants to know is if he comes from the warrior nation of Valterra. Before that, they were on the roof of the house making Eric soak up some sun when he overheard talk about Valterra. His question is how getting a tan and walking around shirtless would make him seem like one of them. But Attis says they are a nation that takes pride in their muscles, though Eric thinks they're just a bunch of show-offs. Since they are an isolated tribe with few people, the perception others have of them is quite peculiar. In his drawing, Attis shows several strong people taming beasts, seemingly somewhat primitive. In this narrative, Eric is the chief of that family who came to the continent to test himself as a warrior. If he's going to walk around in such an embarrassing way as a married man, how would that help him? That's his concern. If he's recognized as a veteran warrior, he won't need to hide his strength, and that way he can gain fame by clearing dungeons and get noticed by the gods. But he still needs to touch the stone, and Attis' suggestion is that he destroy it. Once he does that, the rest of the story would be up to him. Now, everyone is impressed with this powerful stranger, and indeed, he looks like a veteran warrior of many battles. Attis mentions that he scared the receptionist and that with the stone destroyed, it won't be able to determine his level. Apologizing, Attis steps forward and explains that her friend still doesn't understand how that world works. Since the stone uses magic, it's a forbidden item for warriors from his tribe. They are willing to pay for the damage, but the receptionist says that if he doesn't register as a hunter, he won't be able to take on missions. That's fine as long as he's registered as his bodyguard. Now that Eric understands everything, the warrior identity allows him to avoid having his level measured. And even though registering as a bodyguard involves a bit of bureaucracy, Attis could easily handle that by using her charm on the receptionist. Her beauty dazzled the receptionist, making it impossible for her to suppress her more lascivious desires. Her glasses almost failed to filter the light from that radiant face. Once she gained the favor, another woman invited Attis to go to the bar, and Eric realized it's always his friend who gets all the attention. However, he recognizes that it's thanks to her that his problem was solved, and he already knew that with his kind of body, he wouldn't be popular with the ladies. Surrounded by men, they want to know if they could form a team together, and one particularly eager guy even asked if he could touch his muscles. All those hands and questions about how much he could bench press, it wasn't the kind of attention he wanted. To get away, he shouted at them, saying he couldn't take it anymore. At least everything in the city was resolved. But far away, something is happening in the middle of the desert. Among the canyon rocks, there's a passage. At the end of it, light shines, revealing an exit. Its formation causes air currents to always pass through it. At the end, there's a large tower with several cells around it. A man comments that the scale of that place has grown even larger. He says that this time his friend managed to capture many people. They are dungeon refugees, and he only invited them to come there. These people are worth more than ordinary citizens, and there's no one more willing to obey orders than a refugee with nowhere to go. Leslie remarks that he must have done something wrong and that this place was given by the dragons as proof of the alliance they have. All dragons over 500 years old have joined them. They need to know if there's a traitor among them. But it's curious that he went to that region because only in a dungeon city would his human form work. Since the blood is dry, they can't use tracking magic on it, so it's up to Alejandro to do something about it. Dissatisfied, he said it wasn't his fault they lost track of the dragon. With them all gathered, the young man wants to know why Alejandro brought them there, because he doesn't believe it was just, so he could complain to them that he's been playing king. Pointing to the stage, he says that wasn't the reason. They observe as Alejandro gives the order to send in the person. A man enters the stage. He's a former hunter, and he wants to see if his companions will believe his words. He's a criminal who used to kill female hunters in the dungeons, and they stole him away before he could be executed. Already on stage, the prisoner asks if he does this, will he really be freed as promised? Leslie says he's only level 37, but Alejandro told her to look closer. Finally, she notices what's different about him. On his neck, there's an artificial guideline. No one had ever survived such an implant before, and Alejandro says they no longer extract from dungeons, but from people. The other man wants to know if the collateral damage has been reduced, as this is still far below what the person they work for desires. Richard quickly catches on, and Alejandro wants to know what they need to improve. With the wyvern present, he says they need a sacrifice. That was definitely a very kind wyvern. She didn't need to feel that way because it wasn't her fault. The woman wielding swords in both hands prepares herself. Like a homicidal maniac, the prisoner asks if he needs to do it quickly. And since he had just recently gotten out of prison, he should do as he pleased. With the stage set, Alejandro announced it was time for the game to begin. The maniac said that at first he felt really weird, but the more he did it, the more familiar he became with this thing called a guideline or directive. Seeing that his level was higher than hers, he asked if she didn't want to beg for her life. In response, she said that begging in a place like the one they were in was completely pointless. Excellent news for the degenerate, who was hoping she'd react. The wyvern could hear the sound of blades clashing. People from other worlds terrified her, but she had once been the best flyer in the kingdom when the knights rode her. She needed to save that girl while they were distracted and fly away from there. Peeking through a crack, she watched what was happening. The battle raged on with no apparent victor. The girl's feet moved smoothly across the stage. He realized she was dancing a bit disconcerting for him. He told her she should try something more provocative as the audience must be bored with this. But she replied that if that were the case, he should have at least taken a bath. And she hoped he liked his new haircut. Only now did the degenerate notice that his hair had been cut. That made him even angrier. Leslie noticed that the girl also had an artificial directive, to which Alejandro confirmed, saying that only with it could the level difference between them be bridged. She might be able to win, but he didn't find her exceptional in anything. However, she was a test subject with a lot of potential. Seeing that the girl had her eyes closed, he asked if she was blind. With his hair cut, the degenerate lamented that he missed out on the Christmas soup kitchen event, and this filled him with rage. Alejandro asked him to stop, but the prisoner refused. Shifting shape and assuming a hybrid appearance, he said he would tear her apart. Leslie pointed out that he had said they were only doing human extractions now, and she wanted to know why he transformed into a monster. The way it was done, half of what was given to him came from a human and the other half from a monster, which is why he changes form when using abilities. His claws drew near the girl. An electric flash appeared, like a bolt of lightning. She had cut him, and the only way to avoid collateral damage was by using human extraction. Weakened, the criminal realized he could no longer do anything. His body fell behind the girl, who continued without opening her eyes. Turning to Alejandro, she said she had to abort the test because the prisoner had lost consciousness. Alejandro said it was fine as he was useless, but asked her to take care of him before he made more noise. Realizing he was about to receive a wooden overcoat, the prisoner stood up, claiming he was still fine. Before he could even finish his sentence, his head was removed from his body. The coldness with which the woman killed the man surprised the wyvern, who thought that since they were of the same ethnicity, there would be more compassion. She didn't even blink or hesitate in following orders. Richard commented that if she's blind, she must have learned to wield swords and magic through the directive, and besides, she has an excellent sense of danger detection. If that's the case, the artificial directive is complete, and that should have been reported already. But with this directive, her level wouldn't increase even if more enemies were defeated. If she doesn't do that, the directive serves no purpose for them. Additionally, they aren't the only ones who can gain levels this way. Dungeon monsters can too. They could try it with monsters, but it didn't work either. The solution to the problem wasn't there. Alejandro asked if he was referring to a dragon core. That's out of the question. Since they were allied with the dragons, it wouldn't be possible. Then he tossed a medallion toward Alejandro. Even though the alliance exists, it would be a different matter if there was a traitor among them. A special item given to them to destroy the dragon that may have defeated the Lich. Leslie teased him, asking if he was really capable of doing it. It came at the perfect time, as an artifact like that would be extremely useful. They were leaving now, and they would say that the artificial directive was nearly complete, and Leslie endorsed her colleague's opportunity, saying he would be well rewarded once it was finished. Bidding farewell provocatively, she wished him luck. They finally left, and Alejandro was left alone in his room. Now it was his responsibility to find the dragon, and he was at a crossroads. Finding a dragon in human form would be very difficult, as they couldn't use detection magic now. As he was leaving, he instructed the woman to have the wyvern dispose of the body lying there. She opens the door to find the wyvern, but there's nothing there, not even a trace of her. This even makes the blind woman open her eyes just to be sure no one's there. The wyvern had overheard the entire conversation, and the information was too bizarre. Everyone there is insane, and she couldn't imagine getting out of that place alive. With that in mind, she needed to leave as quickly as possible, as every second counted. Using her wings, she forced open a door that was closed. Finally, she saw the sky. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She dashed across the ground, trying to take off. Behind her, the blind woman was coming in a fury, ordering her to stop. Too fast. She hadn't expected the blind woman to catch up so soon. Even though she had left first, she was practically in the same position now. Her blades were ready, and electricity surged through one of them. A lightning bolt struck down, much to the wyvern's surprise. She barely avoided being hit. Had she not taken to the air, she would have been struck. Slightly more relieved now that she was escaping, she continued to gain altitude. She was happy the escape was brief, and now that she was in the air, it would be even easier to flee. However, something latched onto one of her legs, keeping her tethered to the place. The blind woman pulled on the rope and drew closer to her. Everything was happening too quickly. In front of her was the woman armed with her swords, determined to keep her from leaving. With her eyes wide open, she declared that the wyvern wasn't going anywhere. They were connected by the energy rope. But unlike before, the wyvern was now in her element, and she wouldn't allow herself to remain tied to such a place. She definitely wouldn't, as she hated small, cramped spaces. Now the blind woman was surprised. She hadn't expected the creature to be able to speak. As the wyvern surged forward in flight, the woman was dragged along, her sword still tethered to the wyvern's leg. Holding on as best as she could, she asked the wyvern to wait a moment. She warned her not to fly any higher and then let go. Looking down, the wyvern imagined the woman was skilled enough to land alive, but she was hesitant to fly higher because of archers. However, there was nothing visible, not that she could see. On the horizon, greenish glows began to form. Over the entire area, it seemed there was a magical barrier. Finally, she realized that her escape was far from complete. In the crater dungeon, things were grim. In the deepest level, the action unfolded. A massive worm attempted to attack. Its charge was futile, as Eric cut through it as if it were a wall made of foam. He was defeating them too quickly. He needed to control his strength better. Saying that, he landed safely on the ground while cutting down another one of those creatures. There were too many of those truck-sized monsters to worry about them individually. He hadn't intended to use this ability, but he had no other choice. Only his shadow could be seen with this movement. One by one, the monsters were sliced and defeated. This was his signature move called the casual stroll. It involved passing underneath large monsters while holding his sword. It wasn't strong enough to kill all of them, but the result was already satisfactory. Then he shouted loudly that dinner was served. The monsters writhed in agony, terrified of what was happening. A giant blaze of fire engulfed the area. Finally, they were wiped out, no more hostility coming from them. Floating in the air, green orbs appeared. Eric wondered if that could be energy. However, he had never seen anything like it while leveling up. He wanted to know if his friend Artis felt anything different, but all Artis felt was the embarrassment of receiving something that resulted from someone else's effort. Curious, Eric wanted to know why his level hadn't increased, but Artis explained that it didn't happen that fast. He gave a lengthy explanation about it, and Eric thought it was just about killing the enemy. In truth, they don't absorb experience. They absorb the energy of the creatures they kill. It's the dragon's core that does that, and the energy, when absorbed, is unstable and contains life force. They need to absorb this unstable energy, but if they take in too much, they could explode, and Eric told him to put some clothes on. There's a limit to how much energy one can absorb, just like drinking too much water can lead to drowning. And since it's been 15 years since Artis last did that, he's a little nervous, but Eric tells him he might need to level up a lot. If it's been 15 years, Eric asks how old he is. Artis is 150, a child among dragons, but a great-great-grandfather to Eric if he were purely human. Some of them live to be 1,000 years old, and Eric wants to know what level they can reach. Artis isn't sure, as there aren't many ways to measure a dragon's level. It's a situation much like Eric's. There aren't many enemies capable of contributing to this, and those that do are very dangerous. And since dragons live long lives, they require a lot of energy to level up, and his friend says that once the level is high enough, they don't need to keep rising. But ancient dragons didn't think that way, and they became greedy, and small portions of energy no longer made a difference. The same thing happens with Eric. His experience only increased a tiny bit when he defeated a level 50 monster. To continue evolving, they realized they needed to store the energy somewhere. The ancients called this place a well of energy. Humans, on the other hand, called it a dragon's nest. If that's the case, Eric wants to know if in that place he'd be able to level up, and artists mentioned the dragon core. Meanwhile, the wyvern is struck by the massive energy. There's no way to stabilize all that energy without a dragon core. The body will enter a continuous process of destruction and regeneration due to the overwhelming energy. That's why a place like this is a fortress that cannot be breached. The servants see what's happening to the wyvern and urge Elise to come inside. The servant says that Elise is more important than the wyvern and nothing should happen to her. If something did happen, he would never forgive them. Trapped in the snare, the wyvern remains bound. As for Elise, she's given up waiting for the outcome and is returning to a safe place. Her clothing still bears the marks of the beast's tears. Suspended in the air, the wyvern continues to receive the massive energy influx. In a quiet place, a crown falls to the ground. She has no idea where she is. Even so, she stands on a blade of water. All that exists in that place is the open sky and a massive body of water that extends to the horizon. She still doesn't know where she is or what she was doing before this. A man stands behind her, and this man calls her by name, Effer. That voice is very familiar to her. It brings back nearly forgotten memories from when she was just a hatchling. It was this man who named her Effer, because it was a beautiful name that suited her. She can't believe it's the bald chief, and he tells her that yes, it is him, but he's not just the bald chief, but the leader of the Dragon Knights. Emotional, she can't believe he's alive, the bald chief of dragons, but he says that's not his name, and that she's the best among them, she shouldn't cry. But she says something got in her eye, and Effer asks where the others are. In response, the man says it's not yet their time. Underneath the crown in the water, a red stain begins to spread, as if it were blood. For putting the prince's life at risk, he was sentenced to execution. That wasn't his fault, but Effer's, who volunteered in the face of the misfortune. He tells her she is radiant, but also too skeptical. The water starts to rise, and he has something to tell her. She should learn to trust others because she needs someone by her side, in case something falls in her eye while she's flying. The water envelops everything, and where his figure stood, a core forms. She finally falls with her wings injured and her ankle still tied. Even so, tears stream down her face. The blind woman stands, holding a sword in one hand. Focused, she does everything she can to sever the bond. Effer falls onto the platform, her body covered in wounds. Unable to move, she writhes in pain. Ellis runs toward her, much to the distress of one of the servants. She hopes the wyvern wakes up soon and that everything's alright with her. Barely able to speak, Effer asks why the wound came to her, and Elise is relieved that the wyvern is conscious. She had absorbed too much external energy, disrupting her internal balance, and her wounds needed to be treated immediately. Given the situation, Elise asked for a restoration potion, but the servant said it wasn't necessary. It would be a waste to pour it over a body. Alejandro had returned after seeing a flash of light in the sky. He had no idea it was Effer trying to escape, so he instructed them to leave her as she was. Elise tried to insist, but manipulating that kind of energy is difficult even for a dragon. There's no way a wyvern could handle it. It wasn't worth wasting the potion on a dying wyvern. Since she had a sword in hand, she should just finish it quickly. Introducing herself as Elise, she asked Effer to close her eyes. She tried to calm her, asking her to imagine herself as a pot full of water flowing and the water turning into marble. It won't hurt. It's just part of nature. Elise reassured Effer that she was doing fine and that Effer was wonderful company. Finally, Elise struck with her sword. Turning to Alejandro, she asked if she could now have access to the potion. Alejandro was taken aback as he couldn't believe what he was seeing. She had simply made a cut on her own arm. And if that wasn't enough of a reason, she was prepared to increase the cut. One of the servants worried about what Elise was doing and waited for Alejandro's permission. Alejandro, as he left, remarked that the wyvern had better be worth it, as this would be the last time he would be so charitable. Hearing his words, Elise thanked him. Now she was in another room. Her wounds were being properly treated. Effer commented that all of this seemed very strange, and there must be a reason Elise spared her. Indeed, it wasn't as if Elise didn't have a reason behind her actions. Elise asked Effer if she had ever cared for a plant, to which Effer replied that she once had a small garden. Before she could finish, Effer was startled, thinking she might be eaten. But Elise reassured her, saying she doesn't eat her plants and wouldn't eat her either. Elise explained that while she can't see, she can feel the energy of things. She even knows that Effer has a mane, which is why Elise surrounds herself with living objects, because she can sense them. You don't give water to dead plants, but you survive, Elise said, and Effer asked if that was why she was given the potion. Most people, including Alejandro, who also has a directive, think she was just lucky. But Elise could feel the energy core that had formed inside her. It's a dragon core, Elise said, though Effer doubted it because she was a wyvern. Still, Elise suggested it might be possible due to Effer's intelligence. Hearing this, Effer wondered if what Alejandro saw was a core. A dragon core was the last ingredient needed to complete the directive implanted in Elise. But Elise had brought her there without telling Alejandro what she had seen inside her, and she asked if Effer still considered her a faithful servant of Alejandro. Effer pondered all the variables, confused as to whether this might just be a ruse to deceive her. But if she kept thinking that way, she would never know the truth. Turning her back to Effer, Elise asked if she could really see the shape of things through their energy, and Elise confirmed that she could. Effer turned around, making a silly face, and said, "I'm Alejandro." She began making comments as if she were him, saying that Cal licks my hair every morning to make it look like this, and Elise spat out her drink, struggling to hold back her laughter. Effer continued her imitation, and Elise begged her to stop, saying she couldn't hold back her urge to laugh anymore. The two began running around the room, playing and laughing. Not far from there, in an apparently abandoned house, a servant approached a man, saying that some hunters had leveled up significantly that month. But the hunter the man was looking for wasn't on the list, and the servant asked if that hunter might have fled. The man dismissed the idea, saying that he was surely still there, trying to make money and must already have an interesting history. The list included all those above level 50, and beyond that, there was someone else. The servant handed him a hunter's newspaper. "Definitely not them," the man said, "too low level and far too peculiar. There's no way they could go anywhere without being noticed." Inside the dungeon, a hunter was struggling to defend himself from a giant spider. He and his group were having a hard time dealing with all of them. His friend, who was about to finish off his own spider, taunted him, saying he would defeat his spider faster. Competitive, the hunter scoffed, saying that would never happen. A volley of arrows was shot toward the spider. Upon impact, the spider exploded, and at the same time, the other hunter smashed his spider with his hammer. They argued over who killed their spider first, with the hammer-wielding hunter claiming he had already tallied more monsters in total. But his friend disagreed and advised him to take better care of his mental health. Nearby, some women screamed they were trapped in the spider's webs. They had appeared out of nowhere, and one of the women shouted for them to look up. A massive spider was descending toward one of them. Realizing the danger, the hunters called out that they were on their way to help, as they were all part of the same team. One of them was struck, feeling the force of the blow. The shaft of his spear protected him. He had barely avoided being laid out flat on the ground. These were warrior spiders. They shouldn't have appeared there, as they hadn't ventured that far into the dungeon, and they could only defeat them with magic. Faced with the situation, they wondered if they would even be able to outrun them. But then a mage cast a freezing spell over the area. The spiders were immediately frozen. He found it strange that the place had suddenly become cold, and his colleague mentioned that it was someone who had done that. Now all the spiders were dead. The mage approached and clarified that they weren't dead, just knocked out. It was the Voltarian warrior and Artis, the mage, who apologized, saying they didn't mean to get in their way, but they should let them handle the monsters while they saved the women. The young man said it was an honor to meet them and that he felt much safer with them there. Artis thanked them for guiding him. The young man had thought Artis didn't have proficiency with ice magic, but Artis explained that he learned it out of necessity. Meanwhile, the women did their best to seduce Artis, saying they were healers. In this situation, the young man suggested they join forces, but Eric firmly refused. The women insisted, but Eric was adamant. Artis stepped forward, explaining that his friend only focused on his training and always declined invitations. They continued to try to seduce Artis, suggesting that after all of this, they could go for coffee, and Artis fell for it like a fool. Eric looked at him disappointedly. Their strategy required some people to witness their deeds to help boost their notoriety. Not to mention, if they leveled up too quickly, people would grow suspicious. Observing humans, Artis had realized that appearances were very important to them. The witnesses would spread the word of their heroism. However, Eric cautioned that they still needed to be careful and things might not be as easy as they seemed. Artis, confident in his strategy, assured that he would make Eric the most famous hunter in the city. So far, Artis had been right about everything, except for one thing. The girls never seemed interested in Eric, only in Artis. The guy with the short hair laughed, saying they amused him. A real hunter must continue pushing beyond his limitations, he said. And this mage, his appearance doesn't matter. He's not even qualified to be a true hunter. Upon hearing this, Eric stepped in front of the short-haired guy. He acknowledged the man's fame but said he didn't care about it, nor about any disrespect shown to his master. But what Eric actually did was open the door behind the short-haired guy. They had finally arrived. In front of them were several spider nests. In the center, it seemed there was an arena and a spider larger than the others. Even though they had walked a long way, they hadn't realized they were so close to the center. One of the women asked if the dungeon would disappear once they finished. Eric explained that while there were many dungeons, completing one wouldn't cause the crater to vanish. This was a relief for Eric, as they weren't ready to leave the city yet. In the middle of what appeared to be the arena, there was an artifact. The presence of an artifact could only mean one thing, and the short-haired guy knew what it was. There was also a guardian, the dungeon boss. The guardian was known for its long-range poison attacks, and the short-haired guy suggested that Eric join him in attacking the legs. However, the short-haired guy didn't want to just stand by and watch. He proposed that he lead the attack while receiving cover fire. He wasn't about to leave all the glory to the guests. Going over to his friend, he asked for protection for the healers while they attacked. Artis mentioned that something seemed off, and Eric agreed. Curious, they wondered if they should check things out. But Eric was interested in seeing how the others would perform. Protected, the healers prepared their spells. The short-haired guy instructed his friend to follow their usual strategy, and his friend agreed, though grudgingly. Whoever kills the boss would be the winner, and the guy in armor said not everything needed to be a competition. As they approached, the spider launched its venom. Chanting spells, the healers readied themselves to protect their teammates. They were shielded by the magical barrier the healers invoked. Their coordination was impressive. Beyond the defense, the healers cast spells to increase the damage of the attacks. As the team attacked, the healers blocked the long-range attacks. Climbing on top of the spider, the short-haired guy remarked that there wasn't enough time to attack all of the spider's legs. His friend agreed. If they were going to attack, it was better to go straight for the head. They succeeded, and artists commented that they were good, but not as good as Eric, to which Eric agreed. However, Eric was puzzled by how low the enemy's level was, given that it should have been the dungeon boss. The healers also celebrated the team's achievement, having completed a dungeon. They were all excited because it was the first dungeon they had finished together as a team. But before Eric could congratulate his friend, the friend had disappeared. Behind him, a cloud of debris rose into the air. The short-haired guy still didn't know what had happened to his colleague. The healers were also terrified. There was something about the situation that was undeniably immense. The spider's legs were as tall as buildings. It was bigger than the entire arena they were standing in. This was a queen tarantula level 50. Although it's a risky profession, it's uncommon for hunters to die while merely exploring dungeons. This is because they usually stick to areas compatible with their levels before venturing into more dangerous places. But the way they analyze levels isn't always accurate. They end up relying more on what other hunters report. That means the more a monster appears, the more accurate the description becomes, but this overlooks those monsters that rarely show up. Most deaths occur because hunters are caught by dungeon bosses simply due to a lack of information. The short-haired guy fell to the ground, terrified by the size of the spider that had just appeared. In its mouth, the spider was preparing a devastating attack. No one had told him that a monster like this was in the dungeon. The spider's attack hit the ground. The force of the impact nearly caused an implosion, raising a cloud of dust and debris. But the short-haired guy was still alive. Someone had protected him. It was Artis, who had cast a shield in front of him. The short-haired guy asked how Artis could use such high-level magic, and Artis replied that he had learned after fighting someone else who used similar magic. However, Artis had no wand left, and the short-haired guy called him crazy for discarding it. Worse yet, the monster didn't need just magic to finish them off. Full of courage, the short-haired guy demanded that the mage get out of his way. He prepared his spear, ready to try and hold off the attack. But it was Eric who stepped in with his massive sword. Artis remarked that Eric had taken his time, but Eric explained that it took a while to get the healers to safety, and they should be safe by now. The spider screeched furiously. Given its enormous size, it wouldn't be able to follow them. It was time for them to make their move. As they prepared, they discussed strategies for taking down the spider. The question was whether Eric's sword could pierce its exoskeleton. The short-haired guy insisted that they should flee and alert the guild, or else they would die, and other hunters would meet the same fate. Artis argued that this was exactly why they needed to kill it here and now. The boldness of that statement nearly drove the short-haired guy insane. Worse yet, they seemed far too calm about the gravity of the situation. Concerned for them, he urged them to leave, as this wasn't just any boss. Eric simply told them to cover their ears. The short-haired guy could barely keep his footing as the force of the blow shook the ground. Despite his efforts, he collapsed to the ground, while the other two remained unfazed. The impact drove the spider's head deep into its body. The strike was so devastating that the spider couldn't possibly have survived it. The short-haired guy still couldn't comprehend what had just happened in the dungeon. It appeared that the barbarian had thrown his sword like a spear, just like that. Even though the spider's body was severely damaged, it was preparing to attack again. He warned them, thinking they were distracted. But before the spider could attack, its body exploded, and Eric and Artis walked away with their backs turned, unfazed. As if that weren't enough, the sword came flying through the air. It landed, embedding itself into the ground next to the short-haired guy. On the sword, they had attached a wand, and they had exploded it from the inside. That was their strategy. They had just killed a dungeon boss with such simplicity. Even after killing the spider boss, Eric still had a long road ahead. If he killed one of those every day, it would still take forever. The short-haired guy asked if that was it. Eric responded that yes, the dungeon would now close. Riding a lift back to the city, Eric couldn't hide his concern. He asked Artis if he could do anything for the young man, but not everyone was like Artis. Probably the boy was in shock. Since his friend's death, the young man had been paralyzed, doing his best to get stronger. It was good that the warrior was a Valtarian. It must be nice to be born strong. Artis said, though Eric interrupted him, saying, "Look at the boy. Are you saying life isn't fair? Everyone has to struggle to survive." That's how it had been for Eric too. He was lucky to have found them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be alive now. And the boy was well aware of that he was only alive because of them. But what really worried Eric was his friend, and he asked if what had happened to him was just bad luck. He wondered if his friend had died, but as soon as the lift arrived, Martin and the healers were there waiting for them. The short-haired guy finally realized that his friend was alive. They scolded him, thinking he had been hostile to the warrior. In his defense, he believed his friend wasn't alive anymore. The force of the blow had been enormous, but the Voltarian warrior had caught him before he hit the wall, which was the only reason he was still alive now. Though it's hard to believe, but Martin reminded them that they were forgetting something. The short-haired guy became briefly pensive. Then he turned to their two saviors, and all of them, bowing respectfully, thanked Eric and Artis for saving them. Eric accepted the gratitude but didn't say anything. He simply said he'd be waiting outside. Martin assumed the short-haired guy had angered Eric, but Artis had a proposal. The artifact they retrieved was useless to them, and they were going to sell it in the market. However, they wanted to give the group the opportunity to buy it first. Since they wanted to sell it quickly, they'd offer it at half price. The short-haired guy didn't understand why they'd do that. Artis told him he was lucky. Inside, the group was thrilled to now have such an artifact. It would have been unfortunate if they had died after all that effort, and besides, the short-haired guy wasn't high enough level to handle that spear. Outside, a man passed by in a carriage. He knocked on the wall to call for his passenger. They had found the Voltarian warrior, and the mage was likely with him as well. This was good news, and he hoped both of them would cooperate. He had been searching for them, especially for Artis Banists. Inside the carriage, the man overheard people wanting to thank him, and he was pleased to know he was becoming famous for helping others. He hoped this would lead to being noticed by the gods soon. In this way, he could eventually work for the goddess, take revenge on the evil god, and maybe, one day, return home. Artis was already searching for Eric, who hid remarkably well for someone his size. The carriage stopped beside Eric, and the man asked if he had time for a conversation. Eric figured his friend must have already left, but after searching, he found nothing, not even the carriage that had been there. Inside the carriage, Artis asked the man what he was doing. The man had requested a conversation and then ordered the carriage to continue, even surprising himself with how easy it had been. Artis was in a predicament because he didn't have a wand with him, assuming the city was safe. The man remarked that it was wise not to draw his wand and noted how much he resembled her. His sister, in this case, Adora Bannister. She wasn't well known, but 10 years ago, she had fought alongside the 4 heroes against the dragons. Had she returned alive, she would have received the goddess's blessing like the other 4 heroes. Her work had laid the foundation for the ongoing fight against the dragons. Upon hearing this, Artis ordered the carriage to stop. Talking about her didn't interest him at all, and he demanded that the man get to the point. The man explained that the heir to the family had been missing for 10 long years, but now that he had seen him in person, there was nothing to worry about. The carriage stopped as they finally arrived. He had chosen a quiet place so they could talk more comfortably. As Artis stepped out of the carriage, he was met with a familiar sight. In front of him was his home. The man was surprised, as this wasn't where he had intended to go. Eric appeared, joking that he hadn't realized he was so good at traveling by carriage, and the man reprimanded him. Since the coachman wanted to go elsewhere, he had given him a well-deserved break. They should reconsider their idea of becoming famous, as they hadn't expected to have a pursuer. But the man insisted that wasn't the case. Now Eric wanted to have a conversation with him, but the man desperately asked him to wait. Artis glanced at a necklace, commenting that it was real, as it exuded a gentle energy typical of the goddess of light. If that were true, it meant one thing. The man was indeed a representative of the Church of Light, just as he had said, but Artis had slapped him across the face before. The man introduced himself as Otto, a level 45 priest serving the goddess. Artis apologized for the beating, explaining that he hadn't expected to be kidnapped. Otto said he had only done it because the matter was too delicate. He forgave Artis but was furious with the warrior who had hit him without hearing him out first. Otto tried to say something in another language, attempting to explain that he didn't understand, but the priest saw through his ruse. Oddly, the target for the job was Artis, not the Voltarian warrior who traveled with him. Now Artis wanted to know what the church wanted with him. Otto knew that many of the ancient dragons were no longer alive, and he hadn't expected much from Artis, given his lack of experience. Otto continued, suggesting that if Artis managed to mentor the Voltarian warrior, he must have considerable experience for a 17-year-old, unaware that Artis was actually 150 years old. Otto added that he trusted Artis and would be contacting the church, but emphasized that this was a highly confidential mission. They were investigating a man named Alejandro, who had been seen in refugee camps. They had never heard of him before, and they wanted to know if he was involved in some kind of criminal activity. However, the situation was more complicated than that, and Otto explained how the refugee camps operated. With the influx of migrants to the city and rising costs, the poorer residents ended up moving to the refugee camps. A young girl ran to tell her mother that her father had returned home. She eagerly asked if her father had made any money, while the wife inquired about how things went in the city. He replied that he hadn't sold much, but his wife reassured him that he would soon. The girl asked if he had found the person who helped him. He mentioned that he had seen someone who resembled them at the guild, but it turned out to be a Voltarian warrior. Another man nearby commented that it would be great if a warrior like that could help them. Suddenly, the man rushed toward the other man, yelling. He told his wife to go inside as he needed to find out what was going on. The other man shouted that they needed to run because a monster was after him. Unfortunately, the man didn't escape, and the monster caught him. The creature paused to devour its victim. As people fled, Kalango readied himself to fight. The monster should have been nocturnal, and his wife frantically searched for their daughter. She hoped the girl was hiding inside the house while another person arrived to help deal with the monster. Joseph had gone alone to the monster's nest, even though Kalango had told him to wait for backup. But the hunters would never come for the price the refugees could afford. People in poverty couldn't live like this. Meanwhile, the girl went out another door, searching for her father. Without proper training, non-hunters rarely reached level 10. Even weak monsters could cause catastrophic damage to people like them. The church couldn't do much except find a hunter willing to help. What they could offer was to increase the people's contribution level, allowing them to meet the goddess one day. Artists said they would do that, but Eric interrupted. Instigating artists' virtue wasn't enough reason to be looking for a specific hunter. Indeed, Eric was right. Otto and the church weren't just looking for Alejandro. They were looking for where he lived, a dragon's nest. And Artis, being a dragon hunter, should have heard of it by now. Artis scoffed, saying it was impossible, as no such nests were supposed to exist anymore. But Otto insisted that the church wanted to investigate. Alejandro had covered his tracks well, and they were never involved in any direct crimes. Meanwhile, a wyvern flew through the skies with her companion. A lightning bolt struck in the middle of the city. The girl was safe, and the monster had already left. Kalango couldn't believe what had just happened. He didn't know who the woman was who had saved them, but for now they could rest knowing she had been sent by someone. Alejandro, from the dragon's nest. Elise was still unsure if she had understood correctly. Was Alejandro really asking her an effort to help the refugees? But that was exactly what he wanted, for them to capture the monsters from time to time and assist the refugees. He had also ordered another servant to lead the support team. The idea of helping the refugees so suddenly wasn't something Elise had expected to hear. It was clear Alejandro had ulterior motives, and he had commanded the servant to check on the wyvern daily. After all, the last time Efer had attempted to escape. Elise would also keep a close eye on her because if the wyvern escaped again, the entire support team would be punished. Initially, the location was hidden, but now it seemed many refugees were eager to move there. Going forward, they would discuss the dragon's nest and allow people to relocate there. Given the effort Alejandro had put into keeping the place secret, his sudden shift in attitude didn't make sense. Elise wanted to understand his reasons, but someone called out to her. A massive monster was heading toward her, ready to attack, but Efer intervened, preventing disaster. The monster was momentarily distracted by the pain, but Ellis remained concerned for Efer. She didn't know if anything was wrong or if her companion was hurt. But one thing was clear, she definitely needed a bath before anything else. Shielding herself from the wind blowing in her face, she declared that it was enough for the day. Efer remarked that it would be a shame to let hair like that go unwashed, but Ellis pointed out that there were still monsters lurking around. Besides, they don't need to hunt them all. They must have realized by now that the area belongs to the humans, as she has lived like a wild monster for a long time. The wyvern wants to know if Ellis sometimes uses her sword without the directive, and indeed, that happens. The patterns with the directive are always the same, and occasionally, she changes them. So the wyvern got curious. The directive helps her use the sword in the most efficient way, but when she was little, she saw someone using the sword in a cool way and wanted to do the same. She didn't know anything about hunters when she was young, and her mother used to comb her hair. She never thought her mother fought monsters, and one day she discovered that her mother also used swords. In her innocence, she thought her mother danced with the sword, and she found her fascinating as she practiced with the sword in the mornings. One fine day, she never saw her mother again because she didn't return. A man appeared at her house days later. It was Alejandro. She was taken to the dragon's nest by him, and an artificial directive was implanted in her body. That's how she lost her vision, and she tries to remember the way her mother practiced. If she continues relying on the directive, she fears she will just become a product of Alejandro's work. Hearing all of this, Efer suggests they flee. She could take her, and if they head west, no one would catch them. But Elise cannot flee because it would only be a matter of time before Alejandro claims another victim. The wyvern suggests that Ellis go to the Inquisitor, but that wouldn't work either. She had asked for help from people in the city before, but they turned up dead the next morning. Whenever she disobeyed, he would end up killing an innocent person to force her obedience. The only way she imagines stopping him is by absorbing all the energy from the nest and rendering it useless. If she could do that, everything would change. To achieve this, she needs Efer's dragon core. Even though she has one, she still doesn't know how to absorb energy. The wyvern comforts her, telling her not to feel down because she's very talented, and that one day she will be as powerful as a dragon. If that's the case, it's better they leave before the other dragons arrive. Because if they discover the nest, other dragons will know about it too. That was the missing solution. Alejandro is using the nest to lure dragons there, but the wyvern thinks he cannot defeat an ancient dragon. But Alejandro isn't the type to take such risks. Surely he is capable of extracting the core from a dragon once he finds it. Otto says that Artis must infiltrate the place alone for the mission to succeed. They already have the documentation for his disguise, and since Alejandro is looking for mages, Artis won't be harmed. There are infiltrated people who will help him, but Eric insists on going with him. Infiltrating like this is too risky, and he won't leave Artis alone. However, Eric is too distinctive and Alejandro would easily notice him. If that's the case, there's nothing more to discuss, and they won't take the job. So they should look for someone else. However, Artis accepts the mission and confirms that he will go alone. Eric is surprised by his audacity. He reminds Artis that he is his bodyguard and that he shouldn't forget who makes the decisions. With that said, Otto assumes they finally have an agreement. He will wait for them at the East Gate with the necessary paperwork. For Eric, this is too risky as his friend doesn't even know what he will face. Even though it's a good opportunity to work with the church, this wasn't how Eric imagined it. But Artis's family honor depends on it, as the mission was assigned to someone like him. Still, Eric isn't moved and says there's no need to remind him that Artis is a dragon, and that his family name belongs to humans. Artis asks him to take that back, but Eric doesn't understand why he holds onto that name so strongly. Even though he's a dragon, his former master saved his life and risked hers to destroy that nest. He asked if the concept of honor exists for someone from another world. Honor is irrelevant to the dead. Artis falls silent after hearing this. He believes he's become a bit stronger since they've been training together. And because of that, he says he won't die and Eric doesn't need to worry. Alone in his room, Eric reflects on his friend's words. The carriage continues its journey down the road. Those are the items that need to be hidden, and those are the documents he will need. His level is listed as lower to avoid suspicion. However, he asked for some space to read without interruptions, needing silence to focus. Otto respected his space but thought it seemed like Artis have fought with his wife or something. While waiting, Artis pointed out a mistake. It said his gender was female. Otto assured him it wasn't an error. Faced with this, Artis asked if Otto knew how to apply makeup. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.